Chapter 1284. Blood Soul Curse. Ling Zhao's eyes turned cold. Just from the name alone, it was obvious that it was an extremely evil curse. However, with Wu Hongxi's providence, how could she be cursed by such an unbreakable curse? Unless the person who cursed her was someone with even more providence than her. That didn't make sense. How could someone with providence be so evil? That's right. Hong Cho invited you and the Arhat here to help me suppress this curse for the time being. Wu Hongxi took a deep breath and bent down to pick up her clothes. She turned to look at Ling Xiao and Yaoguang. Young Master's righteousness is well known throughout the world. This incantation is sinister and strange. It was passed down from an evil sect that was destroyed a long time ago. I suspect that there are remnants of this evil sect that are still alive and hiding in our Shenwu dynasty. Princess Royal, you mean? I would like to ask you to find this person and kill this evil for the world. Wu Hongxi clenched her fists and bowed deeply to Ling Xiao. It's my duty to kill the evil spirit, but... Ling Tian said. Ling Xiao frowned. He came to the Shenwu dynasty purely for the ancestral land of the dragon bloodline. Bai Ling and Xia Zhimeng had already entered the extreme lightning ground. Wu Nye had also found the two Buddhist lords' spies. He only needed to find the last person to open the seal and take out Yaoguang's companion Lotus Heart. If the demon in the Shenwu dynasty hid too well, it would waste a lot of Ling Zhao's time and energy. The loss would outweigh the gain. I still have many things to do in my clan. I'm afraid I can't stay here for long. Don't worry, sir. I have a feeling that this demon will appear on my wedding day. However, what surprised Ling Xiao was that a gloomy expression flashed across Wu Hongxian's face as she spoke with certainty. Princess Royal, why are you so sure? This talisman only appeared on the day of my engagement with Shen Jingan. Therefore, I suspect that the person who cast this talisman is very likely related to Shen Jingan. Wu Hongxi sighed. Her eyes were deep. No one knew what she was thinking. That's it. Ling Xiao was a little surprised by this. However, after thinking about it for a moment, he thought of a possibility. Shen Jingan did not have any providence on him. In other words, he was most likely a stepping stone for a villain. As for the reason why this curse was placed on Wu Hongqiu, could the person who placed the curse be a woman? All right, since the eldest princess is so kind, then I will stay for a few more days and help the eldest princess find this evil. Interesting. Who would have thought that this trip to Shenwu would yield such an unexpected reward? And the leak with a higher providence than Wu Hongqiu was undoubtedly a woman of providence. Thank you, young master. Arhat, I don't have any vitality left and my spiritual energy is being sucked dry. Can you use your Dharma form to help me temporarily resist the power of this talisman? At this moment Wu Hongxian was also worried. She had studied it bitterly for 100 years, but still could not find a way to break the curse. Once the person who put the curse on her made his move on her wedding day, she would have no way to resist at all. Amitba. Eldest princess, you may not know this, but the Dharma form of the Buddhist sect is used to punish evil and suppress evil. There is no way to break it in this world. Yaoguang shook his head gently, his golden eyes shining brightly. Arhat, look at me. How much longer can I live in this state? Wu Hongxian smiled bitterly. Yaoguang said in a low voice, Eldest princess, you don't have to be so sad. If you find the person who put the curse on you, you may be able to find a way to break the curse. Although I cannot use the Dharma form of the Dharma form to suppress the evil in your body, but this bead is a sacred item of the Buddhist sect. Eldest princess, please wear it in case you need it. This, Wu Hongxian was stunned. In the end, she did not reject Yaoguang's kindness. She took the string of golden Buddha beads and wore it on her wrist. Thank you, Arhat. Young master, there are 2 more days until my wedding day. I will send someone to serve you in these 2 days. Forgive me for not being able to come here to serve you. Eldest princess, you are too polite. Please go ahead. Ling Xiao nodded and smiled. He walked to the spiritual pool and looked up at the sky. The moonlight was clear and cold. When it shone on the pool, it looked like a dreamy mist. When she witnessed this scene, Wu Hongfu immediately withdrew from the palace sensibly and headed towards Martial Emperor City. The spiritual liquid in this pool is a rare opportunity. Wei Yang, Arhat, let's try it together. Ling Xiao smiled. The black robe on his body dissipated automatically, revealing his sturdy but not abrupt perfect figure. His figure was well-defined, well-proportioned, and tall. Gulp. Even with Yao Guang's temperament, he could not help but tremble. His throat rolled as he tried to suppress the throbbing in his heart. Xianyuan Weiyang blushed. Her jade-like hands gently rubbed the corner of her clothes. She seemed to have made up her mind. She lifted her feet and walked towards the spiritual pool. Amitabha, I have sinned. Yao Guang chanted the name of Buddha and left angrily. However, his bald head was pink under the moonlight. Young master. Xianyuan Weiyang stepped into the pool. She did not take off her clothes. They clung to her delicate body. Her innocent eyes were filled with a blurry expectation. It was both pure and lustful. This spiritual liquid is a sacred item for refining one's body. How much you can absorb will depend on your luck. After he finished speaking, Ling Xiao sat cross-legged in the pool and did not say anything else. All of a sudden, a spiritual wind whistled through the entire palace, and mist rose. As for Xianyuan Weiyang, she calmed her mind and focused, completely devouring the spiritual energy within the pool. As time passed, the originally calm pond suddenly rippled with tens of thousands of ripples. A vast amount of spiritual energy swept across the area, completely concealing the two figures within. Until, suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from outside the main hall. Ling Zhao's eyes narrowed slightly, but the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Is Lord Ling Xiao here? Come in. Ling Xiao stood up and turned to look at Xianyuan Weiyang, who was still sitting cross-legged in the pool and cultivating with her eyes closed. He shook his head slightly. At this moment, 5 women in gorgeous clothes suddenly walked in one after another from the entrance of the hall. Each of them was delicate and beautiful, but their temperament was unique. Young master, we are the 3rd Princess Wu Nianxi, the 6th Princess Wu Lanyi, the 9th Princess Wu Ningxin, the 11th Princess Wu He, and the 17th Princess Wu Qing from the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty. We are here to serve young master. The 5 women smiled shyly. There was nervousness in their eyes. Ling Xiao turned and walked into the palace behind him without saying anything. The 5 women were obviously the maidservants that the Divine Martial Emperor had specially chosen for Ling Xiao. With Ling Xiao's status, ordinary maidservants were not worthy of his attention. Only the princesses of the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty were qualified to accompany him. The imperial family seemed to be noble and honorable, but they were also cruel and indifferent. In the past, these princesses with mediocre talent were all tools for marriage. Although they were used, they could still maintain their appearance. Early the next morning, the 5 women were already dressing up in front of the mirror. They looked refreshed. Ling Xiao opened his eyes. Purple light swirled in his eyes, and he was no longer tired. Young master, there is a fairy playing the zither in the Celestial Music Mansion today. Do you want to go and take a look? Chapter 1285. Oh? A fairy playing the zither? Ling Zhao's eyes drooped slightly, and an elegant and tranquil smile appeared in his mind. Of course I have to go and take a look. You can rest here. After saying that, Ling Xiao took out a few bottles of elixirs from his Qian Kuan ring and placed them on the bed. Here are some elixirs that can help you with your cultivation. Thank you, young master. The 5 women's faces trembled and they bowed. On the other hand, Ling Xiao pushed open the door of the hall and looked at Xianyuan Weiyang, who had been waiting outside for a long time. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile. Let's go and take a look at the magnificent scenery of the Shenwu dynasty. Oh! It was rare for Xianyuan Weiyang to show a trace of resentment on her face. However, with her temperament, she naturally did not dare to express anything in front of Ling Xiao. She just turned around and walked out of the palace. Seeing this, Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. However, there was a deep meaning in his eyes. The human emperor's divine scripture. This was the divine scripture of the Xianyuan clan. It cultivated the divine power of the bloodline. Now, Xianyuan Weiyang's cultivation was still shallow. Once she lost her original body, it would definitely affect her future cultivation. In the end, compared to beauty, Ling Xiao cared more about the upper limit of these destined women's talents. The martial emperor's city today was still bustling with noise and excitement. On the ancient road, there were pedestrians and cultivators walking side by side. Of course, in order to avoid unnecessary trouble, Ling Xiao and Xianyuan Weiyang covered their faces with celestial clouds for a moment of peace. Young master, if one day the extreme north barbarian land and the forces of the Azure continent go to war, which side will you stand on? Xianyuan Weiyang stuck close to Ling Xiao and her hand unconsciously wrapped around Ling Xiao's arm. At this moment, there was still a trace of sadness between her brows, which made people feel pity for her. Of course, I will stand on the side of justice. Ling Xiao chuckled. Based on his understanding of the northernmost land, although it was desolate and barren, the barbarian tribe that lived there had a long history. Even before the immortal race unified the 9 heavens, these barbarian race had already existed. Of course, calling them the barbarian tribe was nothing more than the Azure Sky faction belittling them. The so-called barbarian tribe referred to the human race who still believed in totems and followed the ancient teachings. Now that the Xianyuan Emperor clan was in the extreme north, these barbarian clans were led by the Xianyuan clan. However, according to Ling Xiao's conjecture, chaos had already arrived, and the realm master had gone missing. Regardless of whether they were barbarians or demons, they all had the ambition to fight for the heavens and earth. Once the Xianyuan clan was unable to lead them back to the Azure Sky realm, there would be people who would be dissatisfied over time. At that time, the Xianyuan clan would face a great predicament. The reason why Ling Xiao had not moved to the northernmost region was because he was waiting for such an opportunity. After all, the moon of Xianyuan was his mother, and now she was the clan master of the Xianyuan clan. He could not compete with his mother for the title of the overlord of the extreme north. Moreover, these barbarians were all boorish and unyielding. Even if the moon of Xianyuan gave the extreme north to Ling Xiao, there would probably be people who would be dissatisfied. The best way was to beat them into submission. As early as when the moon of Xianyuan returned to the Xianyuan clan, Ling Xiao had already sent a secret guard to the extreme north. As long as the extreme north was in chaos, he could legitimately conquer this region as the Prince of Xianyuan. On the side of justice? Xianyuan Weiyang sucked on her jade finger. Her small head tilted slightly, and her eyes were filled with confusion. This answer was indeed in line with the young master's character. However, why did the smile at the corner of his mouth feel a little strange? In the end, the word justice was too ethereal and illusory on the path of immortality. All the races and sects were fighting for the heavens and the earth and seizing good fortune. Although the barbarians were boorish in nature, they were still one of the living beings. Now they had been suppressed in the extreme north for 100,000 years, accompanied by wind and snow, and suffered desolation. Could it be that they wanted to return to the Azure continent, so they were evil? Young master, then, what is justice? My will is justice. Ling Xiao smiled and reached out to rub Xianyuan Weiyang's head. Let's go. This immortal music mansion is a rather mysterious sect in the northwest of the Azure continent. Its disciples rarely come out. It is said that today, a fairy from the immortal music mansion appeared in the martial emperor city to play the zither. This kind of opportunity is rare. After saying that, Ling Xiao ignored Xianyuan Weiyang behind him and strode toward the center of the city. My will is justice. Young master means, as long as I can get young master's favor, perhaps he will be happy and stand on the side of the Xianyuan clan? The confusion on Xianyuan Weiyang's pretty face gradually dissipated and was replaced by joy. When she looked up, she saw that Ling Xiao had already walked into the crowd and almost disappeared. Her little heart suddenly tensed up. Young master, wait for me. Although Ling Xiao and Xianyuan Weiyang's faces were covered by immortal clouds, they still attracted the attention of many geniuses along the way. The immortal Taoist rhyme that permeated around them really made people's hearts tremble. At the same time, in the martial Emperor City, a simple and magnificent tall building stood in the center. It was made of black wood and overflowed with an ancient charm. In the middle of the building, there was a golden plaque inlaid with 4 big words carved on it: Jade Immortal Abode. There were no empty seats in the immortal abode. Countless geniuses from all over the Azure continent gathered in one place and waited eagerly. Immortal Music Mansion. There were many rumors about this sect in the world. Some said that this immortal music mansion was founded by a fairy from the 9 heavens. The disciples of the immortal music mansion cultivated the zither, the flute, and the flute. Moreover, this immortal music mansion only accepted female disciples. All of them were as otherworldly as immortals and had an ethereal temperament. However, this immortal music mansion was hidden from the world and rarely had any powerful cultivators come out. Only the disciples would walk the world and amaze everyone for a period of time. And now there was still one day before the wedding of the divine martial Grand Princess Wu Hongqiu, and this immortal music mansion actually had a successor who played the zither and added to the auspicious signs. It was really a fortunate thing. The hall of the immortal abode was bustling with noise. Countless geniuses from the ancient clans and dynasties sat in the hall. They were either sipping wine or drinking tea and burning incense. They were all sanctimonious. On the other hand, Ling Xiao and Xianyuan Weiyang found a corner, sat upright before the table, and waited calmly. Geniuses gathered in the Jade Immortal Abode today. Many powerful auras were scattered in the hall. But they were just not weak. In Ling Xiao's eyes, these people did not have any providence and were no different from ants. Of course, those geniuses who could sit here were mostly from the real sects and ancient clans in the northwest of the Azure continent. That was because the entrance certificate of the Jade Immortal Abode today required 100,000 spirit stones. This number was considered a sky-high price for ordinary clans. But for some descendants of the ancient clans and princes of the dynasties, it was not worth mentioning. Wine and meat went to waste in a rich family. Look, it's coming! It's coming! The hubbub lasted for a while until footsteps were suddenly heard from the back of the hall. Everyone's expression hardened and they turned their heads abruptly. Even Ling Xiao put down the teacup in his hand and looked up with a cold gaze. At this moment, in a long corridor in the hall, an exquisite and graceful figure walked over slowly. Chapter 1286. It was a slender girl who walked with swaying step. Her hair was tied up in a bun, making her look extremely graceful. At this moment, her face was covered with a white tasseled veil, revealing only a pair of bright and clear eyes and a sharp nose. She was dressed in a long, dark green dress that was elegant and ethereal. She looked like she was surrounded by clouds, giving people a refreshing feeling. On her back was an ancient wooden zither. The head of the zither was carved with the head of a phoenix, giving it a unique charm. Normally, even if a normal cultivator used a zither as a weapon, they would keep it in their interspatial ring. Only those who were connected to the zither would carry it with them because they couldn't bear to leave it alone. Her steps were extremely elegant and graceful, natural and unrestrained. Even Xianyuan Weiyang couldn't help but exclaim. He was obviously shocked by the girl's otherworldly temperament. Young master, look! What a beautiful girl!" Hearing that, Ling Zhao's lips curled up. There was a meaningful look in his eyes. Since the first time he saw Chu Yining, he was attracted by the girl's musical skills. She was someone who had no cultivation at all, but she could enter the realm of no one. Such a girl couldn't be unknown in this chaotic world. Moreover, she already had 2,000 kismet at that time. Now, it seemed that his guess was right. A dragon swimming in shallow water was still a dragon after all. With just a great tide, they could soar through the clouds for 90,000 miles. Although Chu Yining's cultivation was still weak at the first rank of the divine overlord realm, her providence had already reached 6,000. It had only been 2 months since Ling Xiao saw her for the first time. It seemed that the girl who lived in the tea-house and paid her debts with a zither finally had a good start on the path to becoming an immortal. But it was far from enough. The zither empress of Jiutian was famous for her zither. She had to wait until the day she became famous in the Azure Sky continent and became the center of attention. Only then would she have the qualifications to stand beside Ling Xiao and play a piece for him. Yes. Ling Xiao nodded and sipped his tea. At this moment, Chu Yining obviously didn't see him. Or rather, she didn't look at anyone at all. Instead, she walked up to the high platform, took the guqin off her back, and sat down with her legs crossed. When Immortal Music Mansion's disciples entered the secular world to cultivate, they didn't hone their zither skills, but their Dao hearts. Of course, Ling Xiao did not know much about guqin Dao. Back in the Xingzhou continent, Great Demon Wenruyu was an expert in this field. Although the Xingzhou people were now as weak as ants to Ling Xiao, they were still very powerful. Back then, if it hadn't been for Wenruyu, it would have been very difficult for Ziyan to truly contend against the first divine emissary. The zither Dao killing sound, when cultivated to the large success stage, could kill without leaving a trace. Clang! The originally noisy main hall suddenly became silent. Everyone looked at the quiet and indifferent figure with anticipation. They watched as her jade-like fingers stroked the strings of the zither and gently wandered around. Chu Yining lowered her head slightly and closed her eyes. In the next instant, the sound of a guqin suddenly filled the entire palace. Boundless Dao rhymes rose and fell, and they formed auspicious signs that coiled endlessly. The wind and rain fell, and the mountains and rivers were magnificent. As the sound of the guqin entered everyone's ears, they felt as if there was a painting unfolding in front of them. Ling Xiao also closed his eyes, and the purple aura around him surged, faintly matching the sound of the guqin. Until the sound of the guqin quietly stopped, and everyone's faces were still filled with infatuation. They were actually unable to extricate themselves from the sound of the guqin. Chu Yining stood up and bowed slightly. She carried the guqin on her back and was about to leave. That's it? Listening to Fairy Chu's song really makes one's Dao heart brighten. Wait a minute. Just as everyone was sighing in pity, a slightly cold voice suddenly came from the crowd. Ling Xiao frowned slightly, but there was a smile at the corner of his mouth. As expected, there would always be villains in a place where there were people with providence. If you don't slap the face, how can you feel good? Hearing this, Chu Yining's footsteps paused. She turned to look at the golden-robed figure, who suddenly stood up below the high platform and frowned slightly. Fairy Chu's guqin skills are indeed rare in the world, but I wonder how your flute skills are? The golden-robed youth had a domineering expression. He was obviously a disciple of an aristocratic family. Who is this person? I don't know. He looks quite arrogant. He doesn't even care about the immortal melody manner. Young master, be careful with your words. Chu Yining's eyes were cold. She turned around and was about to leave, but suddenly, several figures walked out from behind the golden-robed youth and stopped her. I haven't asked for your name yet. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? The golden-robed youth smiled eerily. When he heard Chu Yining play the guqin just now, his stagnant cultivation level actually loosened a bit. It was obvious that this girl's guqin music contained the charm of the great Dao. If he could keep her by his side and listen to her play the guqin and flute every day in the future, it would not only be a kind of enjoyment, but also a good kind of cultivation. Young master, I'm the owner of the Jade Immortal Tower. Fairy Chu is, in the main hall, a middle-aged woman suddenly walked out. She was dressed in golden silk and still had her charm. Get lost. However, before he could finish his words, an old man behind the young man suddenly attacked. He turned into a palm print made of spirit light and slapped the beautiful woman away. No one who has caught my young master's eye has ever escaped. The elder's holy intent surged as he said calmly, Where did this person come from? How dare he be so arrogant in the Shinwu dynasty? Is he looking down on the Shinwu dynasty? Many Shinwu prodigies shouted angrily. In the end, those who could spend 1,000,000 spiritual stones to listen to music in the Jade Immortal Tower were the true disciples of the Shinwu dynasty. These people were young and full of vigor. How could they just watch an outsider act arrogantly in the martial emperor city? I'm Wang Wuchao, the second young master of the Wang family of Taiyuan Mountain. I wonder if Fairy Chu is willing to move to Taiyuan Mountain with me? The golden-robed youth smiled disdainfully. He didn't care about these Shinwu prodigies at all. The Wang family of Taiyuan Mountain was an ancient clan comparable to the Shinwu dynasty. Even the princes of the Shinwu dynasty wouldn't dare to argue with him, let alone these ordinary imperial dynasty prodigies. Because this time, he was using the wedding of the princess of the Shinwu dynasty as an opportunity to propose marriage to a princess of the Shinwu dynasty. This way, the Shinwu dynasty and the Wang family, the two supreme forces of the Azure Firmament, would form an alliance to face the chaotic world together. The Shinwu dynasty wouldn't miss such an opportunity. So, in Martial Emperor City, who would dare to say no to Wang Wuchao even if he killed Chu Yining, let alone abducting a commoner girl? As for the Immortal Music Mansion, such a mysterious and extraordinary sect might be a little intimidating to ordinary forces. But to a supreme lineage like the Wang family, it was no threat at all. What? The Wang family of Taiyuan Mountain? As expected, many imperial dynasty prodigies' expressions changed when they heard Wang Wuchao's words. They quietly sat back down in their seat. Fairy Chu, are you coming with me yourself, or do I have to order someone to escort you? Seeing this, Wang Wuchao's expression became even more arrogant. He looked up at the girl on the high platform and sneered. Chapter 1287. Master has ordered me to enter the world of mortals, not your great abyss royal family. Chu Yining shook her head. Although there was fear in her eyes, she wasn't willing to compromise. Although her cultivation level was still low, it was obvious that Wang Wuchao harbored ill intentions towards her from his appearance. If she fell into the hands of this young man, she would suffer a fate worse than death. Ha 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 ha, secular world! Today, I'm inviting you to Taiyuan Mountain. Even the divine martial crown prince can't stop you. Wang Wuchao shouted angrily and gave the two young men behind Chu Yining a look. The two immediately understood. Spiritual light bloomed around them as they prepared to attack Chu Yining. Stop! Just then, a low shout came from outside the hall. Then, a handsome young man in white walked in from the outside of the hall. His divine aura was vast and mighty, and there were also several people following behind him. However, compared to the other young masters, this person had a righteous aura. He walked like a tiger or a dragon, and his face was dignified. But when they saw who it was, the quiet crowd burst into an uproar again. I was wondering who it was. So it's the War Emperor Dynasty's young prince. SSS. Sometimes I feel like this trash is a good person. 1, 2, 3, ha 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 ha, Brother Wang, right? I can tell you're from a famous family. You have a noble aura. At that moment, the young man who looked cold suddenly changed his attitude. He walked to Wang Wuchao with a smile and put his arm around his shoulder. Brother Wang, I can smell your domineering aura from afar. Who are you? Get out of my way. Wang Wuchao pushed the young man in white away. He looked extremely annoyed. Brother Wang, you don't even know me? The white-robed young man frowned slightly. Although he did not emit any aura, he gave off an inexplicable feeling of extreme pressure. It was as if, under his frivolous appearance, there was a hidden fierceness. I can't believe there's someone in Martial Emperor City who doesn't know me. To be honest, Wang Wuchao was a little confused. The little prince of the War Emperor dynasty? He had never even heard of this dynasty before. Moreover, from the tone of the crowd, this white-clothed youth was clearly a piece of trash. However, the pressure that was close to him was real. In other words, this white-robed young man might not be as simple as he seemed on the surface. You're an outsider. Don't you think it's a little unreasonable for you to be so arrogant in my territory? The white-clothed young man sneered. He turned around and glanced at Chu Yinin on the high platform with a gentle smile. Although he did not enter the main hall earlier, it was because he did not have that many spirit stones with him. However, even though he was outside the palace, he could still hear the heavenly music. A woman like this, even if she had no cultivation, was still a treasure in the world. How could she be humiliated by the young master of the Wang clan? Who are you? Wang Wuchao frowned. He pulled a genius from the Emperor dynasty to him. Tell me, who is he? Young Master Wuchao, he's called Zhan Xiaotian, the 9th prince of the War Emperor dynasty. He's currently a hostage of our Shenwu dynasty. Hostage? Wang Wuchao was taken aback. His eyes flashed fiercely. You're just a hostage. How dare you show off in front of me? Men, get. Brother Wang, don't listen to his nonsense. Zhan Xiaotian shook his head with a smile. He suddenly lowered his voice and whispered into Wang Wuchao's ear, Brother Wang, with the Shenwu dynasty's strength, why do you think they would keep a mere prince like me as a hostage? Why? Wang Wuchao was taken aback again. What he said was quite scary. That's right. Why would the Supreme Azure dynasty imprison a mere prince of a dynasty as a hostage? Could it be that there was something in the War Emperor dynasty that the Shenwu dynasty was wary of? Although the Wang clan of Taiyuan Mountain was also a Supreme Azure dynasty, the two factions were on par. However, the Shenwu dynasty still had the upper hand in terms of expert. Wang Wuchao was arrogant, but he was not brainless. Because I have the bloodline of the great emperor. Zhan Xiaotian smiled faintly and patted Wang Wuchao's shoulder. Brother Wang, I feel like we've known each other for a long time. Why don't we move and have a few drinks? The bloodline of the great emperor. This. Wang Wuchao pondered. He felt that something was not right. However, he couldn't figure out what exactly was wrong with it. From the beginning to the end, Ling Xiao didn't open his mouth. He just drank his tea with a gentle smile on his face. He saw it the moment Zhan Xiaotian entered the palace. He saw the dazzling providence on him that was as bright as the sun. The sacred firmament body. Ling Xiao did not know how powerful this sacred firmament body was, but the name alone was enough to make people feel pressured. An 8th-grade venerable realm cultivator with 20,000 luck points. This was a leak that was not weaker than Zhang Juji. It was even more terrifying than a mortal like Yang Yuan. Of course, what Ling Xiao was thinking about now wasn't how to harvest this leak. Ling Xiao could easily take the life of a hostage from the imperial dynasty with just a thought. But, to a villain, killing someone was not something to be proud of. Only by squeezing out all the value out of him would he be able to make the best use of him. That's right, there was a reason why the Shenwu dynasty imprisoned him here. The sacred firmament body was one of the reasons. Secondly, the War Emperor dynasty must have some secrets. After obtaining the divine Azure Dragon Vein from the Daotian Academy, Ling Xiao had a new understanding of the dragon veins in this world. An Azure Dragon bloodline already had the power of a prime. What kind of destructive existence would the divine dragon bloodline and sacred dragon bloodline, which were even more terrifying, be? An imperial dynasty that had been around for hundreds of thousands of years and ruled thousands of immortal dynasties. What grade do you think the dragon vein of the Shenwu dynasty is? With the strength of the Taigu Ling people, it would not be too difficult for them to annihilate a supreme orthodoxy. However, now that the world was in chaos, Ling Xiao would not easily reveal the strength of the Ling people. He did not want to draw too much attention to himself. If the War Emperor dynasty really had the strength that the Shenwu dynasty was wary of, perhaps he could use it. Brother Wang, you're here? In the main hall, Wang Wuchao was dragged out by Zhan Xiaotian with a hesitant look. However, at that moment, a gentle laugh came from outside the hall. A young man in a golden robe with a cold expression walked in and laughed heartily at Wang Wuchao. However, when he saw Zhan Xiaotian beside Wang Wuchao, the young man was clearly stunned. He asked in confusion, "Zhan Xiaotian, why are you here, you piece of trash?" Ha, second brother Wu, I was just about to bring brother Wuchao to you. What did I say? In this martial emperor city, I, second brother Wu, am the real master. Ha. Chapter 1288. No, that's not what you said just now. Wang Wuchao turned around and looked at Zhan Xiaotian. You said, that's not important. That's not important. It's rare for everyone to gather here. I suggest we go somewhere else and have a few drinks. Zhan Xiaotian's sudden shout scared Wang Wuchao so much that he couldn't help but tremble. Second Prince Wu, this person. Let me introduce this person to you. Second Prince Wu was called Wu Tianqing, and he was a famous genius of the Shenwu dynasty. In fact, compared to Crown Prince Wu Tianqi, the second prince's cultivation and combat strength were even stronger. However, the Crown Prince, Wu Tianqi, was much better in terms of scheming and mentality. This person is well known in Martial Emperor City. He's a piece of trash. The War Emperor dynasty's little prince has nothing but a glib tongue. Wu Tianqing sneered and looked at Wang Wuchao meaningfully. How did you get to know him, brother Wang? I don't know him. How dare you trick me? Wang Wuchao's expression changed when he heard Wu Tianqing's words. He turned around and glared at Zhan Xiaotian. You're asking for it. Before Yin Xiaotian could open his mouth again, Wang Wuchao threw a punch at the young man's chest, sending him flying dozens of feet away. Zhan Xiaotian landed on the ground with a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. However, his expression didn't change much. The gloom in his eyes disappeared in a flash. Ha, brother Wang is indeed unparalleled. The strength of a casual punch almost killed me. Zhan Xiaotian stood up awkwardly with a bright smile on his face. Then, he stepped forward and said calmly, Brother Wang, you've beaten me up and vented your anger. Let's go and have a drink. Drink your ass. Get out of my way. Wang Wuchao shouted and looked up at Chu Yinin. Don't think I don't know what you're planning. What, kid? You want to be a hero and save the damsel in distress? Are you worthy? Saving the damsel in distress? Wu Tianqing frowned slightly. When he saw Chu Yinin being blocked by the two servants of the Wang family, he immediately had a guess. Second Prince, I would like to invite this disciple of Immortal Music Mansion to Taiyuan Mountain as a guest for a few days. Do you have any objections? Haha, isn't it their honor that Brother Wang wants to invite them to Taiyuan Mountain? You, on the high platform, Chu Yinin frowned slightly. With her status, it was impossible for her to fight against these two young masters in the martial Emperor City. Furthermore, even if Master came personally, he probably wouldn't dare to rashly provoke these two supreme forces. What are you waiting for? Fairy Chu, please come to my palace for a chat. Wang Wuchao's expression became even more arrogant. With Wu Tianqing's words, who in the entire Shenwu dynasty would dare to oppose him? Stop! But... Just as Wang Wuchao waved his hand to signal his subordinates to attack, Jean Chatillon coldly shouted once more. The smile on his face had already vanished. He took a deep breath and seemed to have made up his mind. Around his body, there were faint spiritual inscriptions that flowed and meandered. It was vast and mysterious. Seeing that, not only was Wang Wuchao stunned, but even Wu Tianxing had a stunned expression. Why did this fluctuation feel a little awesome? When did this Jean Chatillon cultivate spiritual power? Jean Chatillon, are you courting death? Wu Tianxing frowned and walked to Wang Wuchao's side. With his current status, it was already a fool's dream to covet the throne of the Shenwu dynasty. However, Wang Wuchao came here for a marriage alliance. Wu Tianxing had a sister named Wu Nianxi, who was ranked third. Her personality was like water, pure as ice and jade. As long as he could facilitate this marriage, he would have the opportunity to form an alliance with the supreme force of Taiyuan Mountain. At that time, the throne might not be out of his reach. Even if I'm courting death, do you dare to kill me? Jean Xiaotian's cowardice was replaced with a disdainful smile. Seeing this, many of the young masters in the hall were stunned. What was wrong with Jean Xiaotian today? As a hostage of a small dynasty, he was sent to Martial Emperor City at a young age. He was cautious and cowardly. Not to mention the second prince, even the servants of the imperial court did not take him seriously. It was said that 10 years ago, an official from the War Emperor dynasty came to Martial Emperor City to bring back this prince. In the end, after witnessing this cowardice, he left in a huff and did not mention this matter again. But what was wrong with him today? Not only did he offend the young master of the Wang family, but he also did not take the second prince seriously? Jean Chatillon, do you really think I don't dare to kill you? Wu Tianxing's eyes were dark as he clenched his fist. To be honest, with his status, he did not dare to kill Jean Chatillon. But, after beating him half to death, he could just take care of him. You can try. Jean Xiaotian's expression was calm. He did not take Wu Tianxing's threat seriously at all. Arrogant brat, no matter who you are, since you dared to trick me today, you must die. Before Wu Tianxing could speak, Wang Wuchao suddenly gave a look to the Saint Realm's servant beside him. The servant immediately nodded and took a step forward, about to pounce on Jean Chatillon. Vast divine aura swept through the main hall, and the people who were watching the show quickly backed away. In the face of a Saint Realm expert, even Jean Chatillon had a solemn expression on his face. He seemed to be in deep thought. Back then, the divine Martial Emperor kept him as a hostage in Martial Emperor City because of a rumor circulating in the War Emperor dynasty. The heavens appeared, and the divine Martial Emperor was destroyed. However, although the War Emperor dynasty was only a small dynasty, the War Emperor's name was well known in the northwest of the Azure continent. For 100,000 years, he still intimidated the other dynasties. When the divine Martial Emperor established his dynasty, it was this War Emperor who accompanied him. He fought against the world and made great contributions. With the divine Martial Emperor's personality, of course, he would want to uproot this dynasty to prevent future troubles. However, for tens of thousands of years, the War Emperor dynasty had been loyal. They had been guarding the border of the divine Martial Emperor. Although they established themselves as a dynasty, they had always regarded themselves as subjects. They had never crossed the line. Moreover, the War Emperor dynasty respected martial art. Whether it was the War Emperor's family or the generals in the dynasty, they were all unparalleled in combat strength and were brave and fearless. Therefore, if the divine Martial Emperor rashly sent out troops to conquer this dynasty, it would attract the suspicion of many of the vassal dynasties. This was the biggest difference between the imperial court and the clans. The imperial court controlled billions of miles of mountains and rivers and had countless soldiers under its command. However, it was not always reliable. Although the divine Martial Emperor enjoyed more glory than the clan leader, he also had to bear more pressure. Water could carry a boat, but it could also capsize it. Therefore, to be able to control a dynasty and stand at the peak of power, one's cultivation was one thing. More importantly, it was the art of controlling people. After all, no matter how strong the divine martial emperor's family was, they were still weak compared to the 1,000 dynasties. Since the day he awakened the sacred body of the ether, Jean Chautian knew that he had to be careful and pretend to be a good-for-nothing. Only then would he be able to return to the War Emperor dynasty and stand tall. Otherwise, if he showed that he was different, what awaited him would be a crime and death. Chapter 1289. Sigh. Jean Chautian sighed in his heart. With his strength, if he went all out, a mere first-grade Saint Realm expert might not be his match. However, if he exposed his trump card for a girl he had nothing to do with, his 300 years of forbearance would be completely meaningless. Of course, Jean Chautian didn't believe that Wu Tianxing would just watch him die at Wang Wuchao's hands. No matter how useless he was still the War Emperor's descendant. The War Emperor had contributed greatly to the War Emperor's conquest of the world. If he died in War Emperor City, the northwest of the Azure continent would fall into true chaos. The War Emperor dynasty had 30,000 war guards. They were powerful guards that had dominated the Azure continent for 100,000 years. Even though the War Emperor dynasty was located in a remote corner, was weak, and had no reputation, no one in the divine martial realm dared to look down on them. The Wang family of Taiyuan Mountain? The second prince of the divine martial realm? Is this how you bully the weak? However, just as Jean Chautian was filled with grief and indignation and Chu Yinin was filled with despair, a cold voice suddenly sounded from a corner of the hall. The entire hall fell silent. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice with astonishment, a trace of surprise in their eyes. Both Wang Wuchao and Wu Tianxing were the most powerful prodigies in War Emperor City. These two people's cultivation, combat strength, or background were all supreme. In the entire Azure continent, not many people dared to provoke them. Even the Saint Stage expert stopped in his tracks in confusion and looked at Wang Wuchao at a loss. "HM?" On the platform, Chu Yinin's eyes trembled. Her heart was pounding. However, when Chu Yinin saw the black-clothed figure sitting in the distance with his hair tied up, her expression suddenly turned sluggish. Then, under the dumbfounded gazes of the Azure Firmament prodigies, she actually took a step forward and rushed towards Ling Xiao. The white veil on her pretty face quietly slid down at this moment, revealing a delicate and elegant, unparalleled immortal face. Even though Ling Xiao's face was covered, but Chu Yinin recognized him immediately. He was the young man who had given her spiritual stones at the border of the ancient Qilin dynasty. Her bearing was unparalleled and her words were clear. His every move was filled with an indescribable nobility. Instantly, the sound of people sucking in cold breaths rose and fell. All the heaven's favorites' eyes were now filled with intoxication. Wang Wuchao, in particular, swallowed hard in excitement. He pointed at Chu Yinin and said, "Capture her. Touch her and you'll die." From the beginning to the end, Ling Xiao didn't even spare a glance at Wang Wuchao and Wang Wuchao. He only minded his own business and sipped his tea. The Saint Realm expert stopped again when he heard this, and he seemed to be slightly hesitant. He didn't know why, but at this moment, he didn't feel any spiritual pressure. However, there was an indescribable sense of uneasiness. It was as if someone had placed a sharp blade on his neck. If he moved recklessly, his head would be separated from his body. "What are you waiting for? Wang Irma, didn't you hear what I said?" Wang Wuchao furrowed his brow and bellowed. In the end, the saint gritted his teeth and extended his hand. A spirit palm descended from the sky, attempting to capture Chu Yinin. But, at this moment, the space in front of Wang Irma suddenly froze for a moment. Then, countless strange phenomena began to surge. Divine mountains, great rivers, brilliant galaxies, and purple chi hung in the east. The entire space seemed to have returned to chaos. Everything was silent and Taoist rhymes flowed. Before the shock on Wang Irma's face dissipated, he saw the void in front of him suddenly crack open. A tall figure in black slowly walked out. He held an ancient bronze sword in his hand. Purple chi lingered on it, and the sword's momentum was 3,000 times stronger. Hum! The sound of a sword suddenly resounded in the main hall. Everyone only saw a wisp of purple light piercing through the void and destroying everything. The spirit palm that Wang Irma extended shattered from the middle. It turned into spiritual light and scattered. It was a shocking sight. Gulp. At this moment, everyone looked at the young man who had appeared beside Chu Yinin in shock. He could break a Saint Realm expert's attack with a casual swing of his sword. Could it be that this young man was also a Saint Realm expert? Wang Irma, what are you waiting for? Hurry up and give me. Before Wang Wuchao could finish his sentence, his face suddenly turned pale. He wasn't the only one. All the young prodigies in the main hall widened their eyes. Their bodies trembled as if they had seen something horrifying. At this moment, they saw the Saint Realm servant standing in front of Wang Wuchao suddenly crack open from the middle. Blood and internal organs splattered all over the ground. It was a shocking and nauseating sight. Even Chu Yinin covered her mouth tightly, trying not to cry out in shock. He killed a Saint Realm expert with a single swing of his sword. Although for a servant like Wang Irma, his cultivation base was mostly increased by medicinal pills, and he might not even be able to overcome the Saint Tribulation himself. However, he was still a Saint Realm expert. He was an expert who dominated the world and controlled the life and death of countless people. Wang Wuchao's mouth was agape as he stared at the young man in front of him. He clearly hadn't recovered from the scene before him. Who are you? How dare you kill someone in front of the Xinwu dynasty? What, do you think the imperial dynasty has no laws? Wu Tianxing frowned as he weighed the pros and cons in his mind. Although he was extremely wary of the young man in front of him, this was the Xinwu dynasty. However, this was the Xinwu dynasty, and he also had many life-saving trump cards in his hands. Right now, as long as he helped Wang Wuchao out a little, their relationship would definitely become stronger. At that time, the throne would be up for grabs. Laws? Ling Xiao shook his head slightly. His eyes were clear and cold. It's because of people like you who bully others that the world is in turmoil. You! Wang Wuchao and Wu Tianxing exchanged glances. Murderous intent swirled in their eyes. Then, they waved their hands at the same time, ordering the servants behind them to charge at Ling Xiao. Young master! Leave now. Don't worry about me. Chu Yinin's expression changed. She didn't know where she got the courage to grab Ling Xiao's arm and shield him behind her. With her knowledge and experience, the Xinwu dynasty was already at the top of the world. There was no way to provoke them. Even if Ling Xiao's combat strength was unparalleled, if he provoked this faction, stop. However, just as the group of exalted realm servants rushed out and surrounded Ling Xiao and Chu Yinin, a cold shout came from outside the palace. A beautiful figure in red walked in from outside the palace. Behind her was a young man in a golden robe. 9 pythons coiled around his body, and he had a purple-gold dragon crown on his head. He looked majestic and handsome. Wu Tianxing was stunned when he heard the voice. When he turned his head again, he saw that the 2 figures were already in front of them. Wu Tianxing, how dare you? Wu Hongxi snorted coldly, her eyes filled with murderous intent. Originally, she didn't have a deep relationship with the 2 princes of the Xinwu dynasty. However, Xin Jingan had saved the crown prince, Wu Tianqi. Therefore, the blood-clad marquis mansion was now under the crown prince, and Wu Tianxing had always been seen as the biggest obstacle to the crown prince's ascension. The evils he brought upon himself were the hardest to bear. Chapter 1290. Wu Hongqiu? Wu Tianqi? Inside the main hall, Wu Tianqing frowned slightly. There was a hint of disdain at the corner of his mouth. No wonder you have the guts to kill people on the streets of the Shenwu dynasty. You have someone backing you up. In Wu Tianqing's eyes, Ling Xiao was only so arrogant because he had the crown prince and the eldest princess behind him. However, he was now on the same side as Wang Wuchao. Anyone with a brain would know what to do. Wu Tianqing, how dare you? Wu Hongqiu looked up at the young man in black who was being protected by Chu Yinin. The playful look in his eyes made the eldest princess of the Shenwu dynasty tremble. She almost knelt on the spot. With Ling Zhao's status, even her father wouldn't dare to speak so rudely to him, let alone the second prince of the Shenwu dynasty. The Wang family of Taiyuan Mountain? If the Wang family knew that the person Wang Wuchao provoked today was the young master of the Ling clan, Ling Xiao, they would probably chop him into pieces overnight. Humph! Wu Hongqiu, how dare you act so rudely in front of me? Wu Tianqing's eyes never fell on Wu Hongqiu, but on Wu Tianqi who was behind her. At the end of the day, both Wu Hongqiu and Xin Jing dared to act so arrogantly in Emperor City because of the crown prince. If it weren't for the crown prince, Wu Tianqing could have easily killed the two of them. Foolish! Wu Hongqiu took a deep breath and walked to Ling Zhao's side. Then, under everyone's shocked gazes, she bowed down. Sir, how do you want to deal with these two? Boom! In the main hall, everyone's faces were filled with fear and shock. Sir? Deal with them? Was Wu Hongqiu crazy? She wanted to deal with the second prince of the imperial dynasty? Also, the word sir was really thought-provoking. In the entire Azure world, there were only a handful of young men who were worthy of Wu Hongqiu's humility. Who was this young man? Wu Hongqiu, you're crazy. Wu Tianqing's expression froze. He felt an inexplicable fear. The smile in Wu Tianqi's eyes made him feel even more uneasy. Forget it. I am just a mortal. How can I dare to decide the life and death of others, let alone a prince of the imperial dynasty? Ling Xiao smiled faintly and turned to Chu Yinin. Let's go. I'll take you away from this troublesome place. Thank you, young master. Joy appeared on Chu Yinin's face as she followed Ling Xiao out of the palace. At this moment, the second prince and Wang Wuchao, who were originally furious and resentful, had long since become lifeless. Ling, gulp. Your Highness the Crown Prince. That person just now was. Wang Wuchao and Wu Tianqing looked at each other, then looked at Wu Tianqi, who had been silent all this time. He had heard of this Crown Prince Shenwu. His talent was average, but he was very scheming. He was a rare choice for an emperor. Young Master Wang, let me give you a piece of advice. If you tell the Wang clan to come and apologize, you might still have a chance to live. Wu Tianqi said indifferently. He took a deep look at Wu Tianqing, then turned and left. At this point, even though Ling Xiao had not revealed his true appearance, everyone had already guessed his identity. Ling people were now in the world. Other than Master Ling Xiao, there was no one else. What a joke. Wu Tianqing and Wang Wuchao wanted to suppress the young master just now? Damn it. Wu Tianqing clenched his teeth. He was certain that Wu Tianqi had purposely told him to provoke Master Ling Xiao so that the young master could kill him. Fortunately, the young master was a righteous person and not a bloodthirsty person. Otherwise, with this person's status, he would have deserved to die for provoking the young master. Of course, the reason why Ling Xiao did not kill Wu Tianqing was not because he was merciful. It was because the second prince was more valuable alive than dead. Ling Zhao's trip to the north was originally for the fortune in the divine martial ancestral land. However, he did not expect that the martial emperor city would imprison a chosen one. As long as he could help Zhang Xiaotian return to the War Dynasty, it would not be long before the War Dynasty became a real threat to the divine martial ancestral land. With Wu Tianqing competing with the crown prince in the imperial court, the divine martial ancestral land's decline was imminent. In martial emperor city, Ling Xiao walked with his hands behind his back with a calm expression. Beside him, Chu Yining lowered her head slightly and sized up Ling Xiao from time to time. She had just embarked on the path of immortality and did not know much about the factions in the Azure Sky world. However, she had heard of the name Lingji. As the only Archean faction in the Azure Sky world that could contend with the Realm Lord Palace, the Ling people's status was unparalleled. More importantly, it was rumored that the young master of this clan was born. He was peerlessly beautiful and cared for the common people. He was the light of the righteous path and had the reputation of being the current human emperor. Although Chu Yining had already guessed that the young master who had given her spirit stones was not ordinary, she did not expect him to have such a background. The only one in the Azure Sky world. What's wrong? Just as Chu Yining was in a daze, Ling Xiao suddenly turned his head and looked at her. Instantly, the girl's face flushed red. She looked down at the ancient bluestone road under her feet uneasily. No, nothing. Oh, right, young master. Chu Yining seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly took out a qiankuan bag and said with a bright face, "Thank you for the spirit stones you gave me back then, young master. These are the spirit stones I saved up recently. I'm returning them to you." How did you know it was me? Ling Xiao smiled. The spiritual light on his face dissipated, revealing his peerlessly beautiful face. Gulp, even with Chu Yining's temperament, when she saw the divine face in front of her, her delicate body trembled and her heart thumped violently. Young master, Yining has been very sensitive to sounds since she was young. Although young master concealed his appearance back then, you did not conceal his voice, so? I see. Ling Xiao reached out and took the qiankuan bag. He nodded slightly. I'll take it. You can go now. Chu Yining's pretty face froze. Before the blush on her face faded, she was completely stunned. She turned around and glanced at Xianyuan Weiyang behind the two of them. Her red lips were tightly pursed, and there were tears in her eyes. Then, she took a deep breath and bowed to Ling Xiao. Young master, Yining knows that the current Yining is not worthy of your attention. However, Yining's Tao and life were given by you. One day, when Yining's cultivation has improved, Yining will repay young master's kindness. Beep. The daughter of Providence is in awe. Congratulations, host. You have received 1,000 luck points and 10,000 villain points. Okay. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. Without looking back, he walked toward the Moonfall Palace outside the city. Behind him, the girl's expression was resolute. She clenched her jade-like hands. However, compared to the prosperity on the ancient street, her figure more or less seemed a little lonely right now. In fact, she didn't even have time to play a song that she had specially made for young master. Perhaps in young master's eyes, I'm just an insignificant mortal. Chu Yining sighed quietly. Her expression was bitter. However, at this moment, a beam of golden light suddenly lit up the void in the distance. A bright golden talisman fell from the sky and landed in her hand. This. Chapter 1291. If you meet any bad guys again, send me a message. Ling Zhao's voice came from afar. The mist in Chu Yining's eyes started to surge. It was hard to resist the sudden concern after being disappointed. Moreover, it came from an unparalleled and unreachable young master. Ever since her family died, Chu Yining had gotten used to the coldness of the world. Other than the zither on her back, she didn't have many attachments. However, the appearance of the young master gave her a sense of anticipation. Thank you, young master. Chu Yining held the talisman and bowed to the black-clothed figure that disappeared at the end of her sight. There was no light in the world, and the sun was hanging in the west. The path to immortality was dangerous, but with the young master's protection, Chu Yining had nothing to fear. Young master. Xianyuan Weiyang walked over quickly from behind Ling Xiao and put his hands on his arm. Let's go back. Ling Xiao smiled, and his eyes were clear. Chu Yinin was useless to him now. However, this girl's talent was visible to the naked eye. She had entered the Tao with the zither. If she was given more time to grow, perhaps a new zither empress would appear in the azure sky. The premise of playing hard to get was that you had to reveal enough fascinating characteristics, from the gift when they first met to today's protection. Chu Yinin was probably grateful to Ling Xiao now. An appropriate amount of distance would only deepen her feelings for him. After all, what you couldn't get was always the best. Yes. However, just as the two of them walked out of the city and were about to go to Moonfall Palace, a shout came from behind. "Young master!" Hearing the voice, Ling Xiao's eyes flashed with a smile. He turned his head in surprise and looked at Zhan Xiaotian, who suddenly appeared. When he left the Jade Immortal Tower, he sensed this firmament saint body's aura. It was obvious that he followed him all the way because he had something to ask. Of course, if Wu Hongfu or the Shenwu Crown Prince had more providence than this person, Ling Xiao wouldn't have chosen him. However, that Crown Prince Shenwu had no providence at all, and Wu Hongfu had been implanted with a blood curse that hindered her cultivation. From the looks of it, even without Ling Xiao, Zhan Xiaotian would break free from his shackles sooner or later and return to heaven and earth to become the true firmament war emperor. The reason why Ling Xiao did not make a move earlier was because he wanted to suppress the second prince and Wang Wuchao while Zhan Xiaotian was hesitating and in a difficult situation. This would make him feel grateful. As such, there was no need for Ling Xiao to deliberately pull him over. He should take the initiative to approach him. "You are..." Ling Xiao frowned and pretended to look at Zhan Xiaotian in confusion. The latter immediately bowed, and there was no longer the playful and mischievous expression on his face. Instead, there was a wisp of a solemn expression. "The ninth prince of the War Emperor dynasty, Zhan Xiaotian, greets the Lord Ling Xiao. I remember now. You're that upright young man from the Immortal Tower." Ling Xiao looked at Zhan Xiaotian meaningfully and nodded. "Why are you looking for me? I've long heard of your righteousness and your reputation as the human emperor. Now that I've met you, I'm not as good as you." Zhan Xiaotian took a deep breath and his eyes shone with respect. All these years, even though he pretended to be crazy in the War Emperor city, he had secretly made a lot of preparations. According to the War Emperor's personality, he would never be able to return to the War Emperor dynasty. Therefore, he had to find a chance to escape from the War Emperor dynasty. However, this kind of escape was not a secret escape. That would only bring endless disasters to the War Emperor dynasty. He was waiting for a chance to leave this imperial city openly. Just now, you stood firm and did not fear the strong. I admire that. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled humbly. However, deep down, he had already guessed what Zhan Xiaotian was thinking. Zhan Xiaotian wanted to borrow Ling people's power to help him return to the War Emperor dynasty. "You flatter me. Compared to you, I'm not worth mentioning." "I don't think so. Your aura is not weak at all." Ling Xiao looked at Zhan Xiaotian meaningfully. Instantly, the ninth prince's heart skipped a beat and his eyes were filled with surprise. All these years, he had been hiding and did not show any of his talent. However, to be honest, whether it was Wu Tianxing or Wang Wuchao, he did not care about them at all. The sacred body of the heavens was a divine body even in the War Emperor dynasty. Punishing on behalf of the heavens and earth would not forgive him. As long as he could step into the supreme realm safely, the heavens and earth would not bully him. "Young master, tell me, why are you looking for me?" Ling Xiao smiled gently. Seeing Zhan Xiaotian's cautious expression, he immediately understood. "If you don't believe me, why do you have to do this? Young master's righteousness is unparalleled in the world." "It's just that. Xiaotian's request is a little abrupt." Zhan Xiaotian took a deep breath and suddenly bowed deeply to Ling Xiao. "I want to become your follower and follow you around in the future." Although, with Zhan Xiaotian's talent, he would eventually reach the peak of the War Emperor dynasty. However, this process was too long. As his cultivation increased, this kind of concealment would only become more difficult. Once exposed, he would be doomed eternally. Ling Xiao was the young master of the Taigu Ling people. Even the divine martial monarch would not dare to disobey him. As long as Ling Xiao agreed to let him follow him, the martial monarch city would not be able to trap him anymore. At that time, he would be like a dragon rising from the abyss and a tiger rising from the peak. Follow me. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows slightly. However, in the end, he shook his head slightly in front of Zhang Xiaotian's disappointed eyes. Although your aura is not weak, as a hostage of the divine martial monarch, you must be hiding some secrets. It is not a wise move to offend the divine martial monarch dynasty for you. Young master, Zhang Xiaotian was speechless and looked lonely. That's right. Ling Zhao's words were reasonable. However, the more reasonable it was, the more Zhang Xiaotian let down his last bit of guard. To be honest, in my War Emperor dynasty, there is an old saying, when the heavens come out, the divine martial monarch dynasty will fall into chaos. My secret lies in the heavens. Suddenly, the green light in Zhang Xiaotian's eyes flowed with a domineering aura. Even the aura around his body was majestic, as if he was carrying the heavens on his back, as if he was the sole ruler of this world. Since he wanted to follow Ling Xiao, he naturally would not follow him as a useless person. To be able to stand side by side with young master, he must be a true genius in the Azure world. Previously, he heard that the young master of the Ling people, Ling Xiao, was once a servant of the divine martial monarch. He killed his way to the Xiao clan and was extremely loyal. Following him, at least Zhang Xiaotian's immortal path would not be so slow anymore. This is, Ling Xiao narrowed his eyes and nodded, so you have a divine body, but, as long as young master agrees to my request, I, Zhang Xiaotian, swear with my Tao heart that I will follow young master to conquer the Azure world. I will never betray you. Zhang Xiaotian gritted his teeth. Facing an imperial dynasty, he was truly weak and insignificant, and his father's plan was too dangerous. For the first time, Zhang Xiaotian had a deeper understanding of the so-called power. So, the difficulties that were harder than ascending to the heavens could sometimes be solved with a promise from someone else. Chapter 1292. Aren't you afraid that I will tell your secret to the emperor? Ling Xiao suddenly looked up at Zhang Xiaotian with a playful smile. Of course I am. But I trust my own judgment. Zhang Xiaotian chuckled bitterly, his expression calm. His secret was the sacred body of the firmament. However, the sacred body of the firmament was his shackle. If he couldn't get out of the martial emperor city, he would be killed sooner or later. Do you really think that the emperor deity emperor has no intention of destroying the War Emperor dynasty? It's just not time yet. How could the divine martial emperor, who ruled thousands of ancient dynasties and ruled the Azure continent for 100,000 years, allow a threat to exist? Therefore, sooner or later, the War dynasty would be destroyed because of an insignificant mistake. Ling Zhao's appearance was the only chance to change the fate of the War dynasty and Zhang Xiaotian. After all, in the entire Azure continent, other than the young lord of the Field Lord Palace, only the young lord of the Ling people could protect the War dynasty. So, you want me to take you as my servant and take you out of the martial emperor city? Ling Xiao nodded silently, as if pondering. Zhang Xiaotian didn't say anything. He just stood aside and waited for Ling Zhao's decision. Of course, with his temperament, how could he not be on guard? If Ling Xiao didn't agree to his request in the end, Zhang Xiaotian had already thought of a plan. The high priest of the War dynasty was hiding in the martial emperor city. In the worst case, he could use the Princess Royal's wedding to escape the city and lead the War tribe to the far north. By then, even the emperor wouldn't be able to do anything. But this was a bad plan. Giving up 100,000 years of heritage was a fatal blow to any dynasty or ancient race. Plus, the far north was the land where the human sovereign Xianyuan was sealed. With the nature of this race, they wouldn't make things difficult for the war tribe. But it was hard to say for the barbarian tribes that had lived in the far north for a long time. I heard that the divine martial emperor will use this opportunity to open the ancestral land and reward the marquises? Ling Zhao's brows were tightly knitted. Purple light flowed in his eyes, containing the divinity of the Avanakya realm. Zhan Xiaotian, on the other hand, had a puzzled look on his face. Clearly, he did not understand why Lord Ling Xiao would bring this up at this moment. It is said to be a reward for the marquises of the current dynasty, but in the end, only their descendants will benefit. Among the 18 marquises of the divine martial marquises, except for Marquis Bloodrobed, who is the current generation, the other 17 marquises are already thousands or tens of thousands of years old. With their status, it is naturally impossible for them to participate in the martial arts competition and compete for the right to enter the ancestral land. Therefore, they will probably send their descendants to compete for the opportunity. Zhan Xiaotian furrowed his brows and looked at Ling Xiao doubtfully. Young master, are you planning to, I see? Ling Xiao nodded and smiled, but his expression was serious. Since you want to be my follower, you have to show me your value. Otherwise, offending an imperial dynasty for nothing is not worth the loss. Before this martial competition, I will tell the Emperor Deity and Martial Emperor to choose someone to be my servant. If you can defeat the 18 marquises, I will agree to your request. With that, Ling Xiao turned and walked out of the city without hesitation. Zhan Xiaotian's face was filled with a shocking desire to battle. He bowed respectfully at the departing figure. Although Ling Zhao's action seemed harsh, it made him even more certain that this young master's character was magnanimous and upright. At the very least, he did not hide the trade-off in his heart. Instead, he said it out loud, which was impressive. The young master had given him a chance. Whether he could grasp it or not was up to him. With Ling Zhao's deterrence, even if the Emperor Deity and Martial Emperor wanted to do something to the War Dynasty, he would have to be careful. Thank you, young master. Little Tian will definitely not let you down. Young master, are you really going to offend the Emperor Deity and Martial Emperor for this person? On the mountain path outside the city, Ling Xiao and Xianyuan Weiyang walked side by side. At this moment, the immortal glow on Princess Xuanyuan's face had dispersed, and it revealed a dazed and ignorant, peerlessly beautiful face. There are still a lot of unfairness in this world. Although it is true that strength is respected, Weiyang, have you ever thought about why it is like this? Ling Zhao's eyes were deep. He was not in a hurry to return to the palace. Instead, he walked on the mountain path with Xianyuan Weiyang to enjoy the scenery. Why? Xianyuan Weiyang shook his head. Every time the young master showed this expression, it made him feel very mysterious. Because the great Tao is unfair. All races have their own selfish desires. The great Tao is unfair. That's right. The strong are respected. Although it is not wrong, it causes the weak races to be bullied and humiliated. Ling Xiao stopped and looked at the mountain in the distance. Although it is difficult for me to change people's minds with my own strength, but I will work hard to eliminate all the injustice I encounter. Boom! At this moment, Xianyuan Weiyang only saw a golden light before his eyes. The Taoist rhymes were formed. The black robe was like the most sacred punishment in the 9 heavens, judging all evildoers. The spirit was willing but the flesh was weak. Perhaps this was the pain in the young master's heart. Xianyuan Weiyang suddenly mustered his courage and hugged Ling Zhao's arm tightly with both hands. He leaned his entire body against Ling Zhao's side and whispered, "Young master, Weiyang is willing to accompany you to experience all the injustice in the world. The destined woman is determined. She has decided to submit. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 15,000 luck points and 15,000 villain points. Beep. The destined woman has submitted. Congratulations to the host for obtaining an additional reward. Destiny forging points plus 1%, 63%. Beep. The destined woman has submitted. Congratulations to the host for obtaining an additional reward. Luck plundering talisman. Beep. The destined woman has submitted. Congratulations to the host for obtaining an additional reward. Mystic Sky Treasure Mirror. Gather your luck and open your own opportunities. Ling Zhao's eyes turned cold. He lowered his head and looked at the blushing and bashful girl. Finally, a heartfelt smile appeared on his face. It was not easy. According to Ling Zhao's original plan, with this girl's naive personality, it would be very easy for her to submit to him. However, to Ling Zhao's surprise, after experiencing countless tribulations and setbacks, Xian Yuan seemed to still have a trace of obsession in her heart. However, today, Ling Zhao's words made her feel the same way. She felt inexplicably sad, so much so that her Dao heart resonated and she completely fell into eternal damnation. However, in this way, Ling Xiao could also have peace of mind to have fun with the Bodhisattva. Young master, Wei Yang will work very, very hard. Sensing the playful look in Ling Zhao's eyes, Xianyuan Wei Yang's face gradually turned red. She hurriedly lowered her head, as if she did not dare to look directly into his deep, pitch-black eyes. However, her two jade-like hands exerted even more strength and firmly held Ling Zhao's arm. Just like her Dao heart, she was resolute and had no regret. Okay. Ling Xiao smiled and held Xianyuan Weiyang's hand as they walked towards the mountain. It seemed that this trip to Shenwu was far more exciting than he had imagined. As for Zhan Xiaotian, I said no. However, one day my holy name will spread throughout the world. Those destined people who are in trouble will definitely walk into the trap. Chapter 1293. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. With the arrival of the wedding day of the divine martial Grand Princess Wu Hongqiu and the blood-robed Marquis Xin Jing-un, the entire martial emperor city was in an uproar. Of the 18 marquises, only 2 were in the martial emperor city. The other 16 marquises had all rushed over to welcome the grand occasion. Of course, this kind of drama of being conferred the title of Marquis and entering the imperial capital was definitely not as simple as it seemed to the world. This was especially true for those marquises who lived far away at the borders. Entering the imperial capital at this time was mostly a bit risky. The sovereign lord bestowed good fortune, but it was also a test of loyalty. Therefore, the martial emperor city seemed to be in a celebratory mood these days, but there was an undercurrent. In the Moonset Palace, Ling Xiao was half lying in the spiritual pool. In front of him were the 2 divine martial princesses. One was holding a spiritual fruit, while the other was holding a jade cup of wine. They were dressed lightly and served him carefully. Last night, Ling Xiao had found out that Wu Tianxing and the 3rd princess Wu Nianxi were siblings. Therefore, Ling Xiao had secretly planted a soul mark on the 3rd princess, keeping her in the imperial dynasty as a spy. Once Zhan Xiaotian returned to the War Emperor dynasty, he would secretly instigate the 2 divine martial princes to go against each other and rebel against the War Emperor dynasty. When the time was right, the supreme force that controlled the Qing dynasty would fall into chaos. Young master, the eldest princess has sent someone to invite you to the palace for the banquet. Beside the spiritual pool, Xianyuan Weiyang blushed and said softly. Especially when the 5 princesses were behaving so seductively, it would make one's mind and body sway. Got it. Ling Xiao stood up and revealed his slender, well-proportioned, and perfect body, and it instantly caused all the women to be shocked and astounded in their hearts. Yao Guang didn't show up at all. He was cultivating in seclusion in his room. However, even so, at midnight, the heart-wrenching cheers still caused people's faces to turn red and their hearts to tremble. Let's go. Radiance flickered around Ling Zhao's body as Wu Nianxi helped him change his clothes. With their status, they didn't have the right to attend the banquet. However, the current Wu Nianxi could be considered Ling Zhao's personal maidservant. She was Ling Zhao's bargaining chip to confuse the Emperor Xin Wu. Therefore, she was fortunate enough to accompany Ling Xiao to the imperial palace for the banquet with Xianyuan Weiyang and Yao Guang. From the looks of it, today's banquet was destined to not be peaceful. Whether it was Zhang Xiaotian or the person hiding in the dark who had cursed Wu Hongfu, they would shake the entire Shenwu dynasty. At the same time, in the divine Martial Emperor Palace, the Emperor deity Martial Emperor was sitting on the main seat. He was dressed in a golden robe and looked majestic. However, compared to usual, the Martial Emperor God's face was filled with joy today. Shun Jing'an's talent and combat power, even in the entire azure firmament, was also second to none. As long as he married Wu Hongqiu, the young marquis would become the martial clan's blade that controlled the world. In the main hall, Crown Prince Wu Tianqi and the other divine martial ministers stood on one side. On the opposite side of the seats were 17 men with terrifying auras according to their age and seniority. These 17 men were the 17 marquises of the divine martial clan. Their cultivation levels were all above the Saint realm. They either had outstanding military achievements or inherited the title of Marquis. Below them were the elders and successors of the various celestial dynasties and ancient sects in the northwest of the azure firmament. Of course, those who were able to sit there were all the top forces in the azure firmament. However, what made people feel slightly puzzled was that there was an empty seat above the crown prince's seat. No one knew who had left it there. Until, suddenly, a shout came from outside the main hall. The young lord of the Ling people, the Lord Ling Xiao, has arrived. The originally clamorous hall suddenly fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked at the door of the palace in shock. Even the Emperor God Martial Emperor stood up from his dragon throne and waited quietly. At this moment, a tall figure in black slowly walked over from below the main hall. His face was peerless and his eyes were like stars. His black robe was surrounded by golden patterns, and he looked noble and mysterious. Ha ha ha, the arrival of the Lord Ling Xiao really brings light to the divine martial dynasty. The Emperor deity Martial Emperor walked into the hall and nodded slightly at the young man in black walking over. Behind the young man, Xianyuan Weiyang was wearing a white robe that was clean. Yao Guang was protected by the white lotus, her Buddhist splendor fluctuating. Only the third princess of the divine martial clan, Wu Nianxi, was not glamorous in front of the two girls. Seeing Wu Nianxi, the Emperor deity Martial Emperor's eyes trembled, and a smile appeared on his face. To be brought to the imperial palace by the Lord Ling Xiao, it seemed that his daughter had won the young lord's favor. As such, his efforts were not in vain. "Greetings, young lord." On both sides of the Golden Hall, the 17 marquises and the ministers of the divine martial dynasty all bowed. Compared to Ling Xiao, their identities were not worth mentioning. Emperor deity. Ling Xiao smiled. He glanced at the 17 marquises and the young men and women behind them and nodded slightly. "Young lord, please take a seat." The Emperor deity Martial Emperor turned around and led Ling Xiao to the seat of honor. Then he said loudly, "Since young lord is here, let the banquet begin. Summon the first princess of the divine martial clan, Wu Hongqiu, and the Marquis of the Bloody Robe, Shen Jing'an. Serve tea and thank the guests." Along with a slightly sharp voice, two figures in red robes strode in from outside the hall. Their faces were brimming with happy smiles. "Greetings, Emperor deity." Wu Hongqiu and Shen Jing stood in the hall and bowed. The Emperor deity Martial Emperor did not say anything. He only nodded slightly and said, "Let's begin." Yes. The two turned around and served tea to the guests. When the last marquis drank the tea, the Emperor deity Martial Emperor nodded and said calmly, "Today, all the marquises are here. I want to open the divine, martial ancestral land, and thank Xie and the others for guarding the border. However, there are limited seats. Lord Ling Xiao and Yaoguang Arhut came from afar and should take a seat. Everyone in the hall can fight for the rest. Thank you, Emperor Deity. Hearing this, everyone stood up and bowed. Obviously, they were looking forward to the divine martial ancestral land. It was said that the divine martial dynasty's supreme ancestors were buried in the ancestral land. They nourished the dragon vein with their corpses and blood to ensure the prosperity of the divine martial dynasty for 100,000 years. Just thinking about the spiritual rhyme and Taoist mechanism in the ancestral land was enough to make people excited and shocked. If anyone was lucky enough to enter the ancestral land, it would be a great opportunity for them. Emperor Deity. However, just as everyone was about to fight for a seat, the young man in black sitting in the front of the hall suddenly put down his teacup and smiled gently. Sir? The Emperor Deity Martial Emperor was stunned and looked at Ling Xiao in confusion. I came to the divine martial dynasty to see so many geniuses gathered here. I have a presumptuous request. Sir, please speak your mind. I want to choose a divine martial dynasty genius to be my general. What do you think, Emperor Deity? What? Hearing this, the entire hall fell into chaos. The battle intent on everyone's faces became even more intense. Chapter 1294. Young Master, are you serious? The Lord of the Xinwu Martial Emperor's eyes were overflowing with golden light like two suns. Even with his temperament, he was inexplicably shocked by Ling Zhao's words. The young master of the Ling people was comparable to the young master of the realm. It was a supreme honor to be his general, follower, or even servant or maidservant. Moreover, once a prince or a noble descendant of the Xinwu dynasty became the follower of the young master, it meant that the two forces would form an alliance. How many people would be able to defeat Qingtsong? Now that the world was in chaos, demons and ghosts were ready to make a move. Even the lord of the Daotian palace could not intimidate them. If the Xinwu dynasty wanted to gain the upper hand in this chaotic world, forming a good relationship with the Ling people was the wisest choice. As for the prodigies in the palace, they were even more shocked than when they heard about the Xinwu ancestral land. As the only young master of the Taigu Ling people in 100,000 years, Ling Xiao had gained the reputation of being the human emperor in just a few months. If one followed him, they would have a chance to reach the top of the world, just like the 7 lords of the palace who followed the realm lord and achieved supreme glory. More importantly, the Lord Ling Xiao was very protective of his followers. Xiao Moi, the young master of the Xiao clan, was the best example. Of course. What do you think, Your Majesty? Ling Xiao nodded slightly, his eyes calm. When he entered the palace, he had already seen that Zhan Xiaotian, who was sitting in the corner, had the highest providence. In other words, as long as he wanted to fight for this opportunity, no one would be his match. Good. Of course. Who would you like to choose, young master? The prodigies of the Xinwu dynasty are all here today. It is their honor to be your follower. Let's have a competition. My follower will not be mediocre. Ling Xiao said indifferently as he sipped the tea in his cup. He had given him a chance. Now, it was up to Zhan Xiaotian to grasp it. Good. Did you all hear that? If you want to follow the young master, perform well. The Emperor God Martial Emperor's gaze swept across the crowd and finally stopped on his second son, Wu Tianxing. With the second prince's strength, he was at the top of his generation in Xinwu. If he could follow Lord Ling Xiao, it would be a great honor for the Xinwu dynasty. Now that the crown prince was in his prime, the second prince was also showing his prowess. When the Emperor God Martial Emperor stepped into the Supreme Being realm, he should hand over the throne to one of them. To be honest, the second prince, Wu Tianxing, was more like the Emperor God when he was young. He was arrogant and despotic, but he was also extremely talented. He was good at using force to solve everything. He was worthy of the surname of Wu. But only the monarch lord knew how many disasters he had caused when he was young and full of vigor. If it was in the past, the emperor deity martial emperor would have been willing to give him time to hone his character until he understood the way of a ruler and his subject. However, in this chaotic world, one wrong step could lead to the destruction of the entire dynasty. Therefore, Lord Shenwu was more inclined to pass the throne to Crown Prince Wu Tianqi. Although his eldest son's talent was not as dazzling as the second prince's, he was extremely calm and steady. He was only 300 years old, but he had already listened to the court and was quite knowledgeable. Although the Shenwu dynasty would not have many breakthroughs in his hands, it would not be a problem for him to stabilize its foundation. However, the emperor's family fought for power. Especially with the second prince's temperament, it was impossible for him to stay under someone for long. Once the crown prince ascended the throne, it was very likely that he would cause trouble. Tianqing, you must seize this opportunity. Otherwise, the mistake you made yesterday will be punished according to your crime. With that thought in mind, the Emperor God Martial Emperor immediately used his divine soul to inform Wu Tianqing. Wu Tianqing was stunned for a moment before he nodded lightly. Lord Ling Xiao. Just as Wu Tianqing was about to stand up, a humble voice suddenly came from the corner of the main hall. Everyone was stunned when they heard the voice. They all turned their heads to look. They saw Zhan Xiaotian, who was dressed in white, standing up with a playful look on his face. He waved his hand at everyone. Zhan Xiaotian? What are you doing? Beside him, a few of the noblemen's sons frowned slightly and scolded him softly. This silly boy was usually a yes-man. It was fine if he was not serious at all. After all, with the emperor's protection, no one in the martial emperor city dared to kill him. However, what was the occasion today? How dare you stand up and show off? Haha, emperor, young master. Go away. Don't stop me. Zhan Xiaotian waved his hand and pushed away the palms that were blocking his way. He walked into the main hall and bowed to the Emperor God Martial Emperor and Ling Xiao. At this moment, he still had a playful look on his face. He was carefree and innocent. Xiaotian, what are you doing? The Emperor God Martial Emperor frowned slightly and asked in a deep voice. To be honest, with the Emperor God Martial Emperor's temperament, he had long wanted to find an excuse to secretly kill the successor of the War Emperor. However, all these years, Zhan Xiaotian was a useless jerk. He was known as the biggest playboy in the Martial Emperor city. He was not a threat at all. Once, the Emperor God Martial Emperor suspected that he was pretending. However, after countless tests, the Emperor God Martial Emperor decided to let him live for the time being. After all, the War Emperor was very important to the many celestial dynasties and ancient clans in the northwest of the Azure continent. Back then, the War Emperor had contributed greatly to the Martial Emperor's conquest. However, in the end, he retreated bravely and defended the border of the divine Martial Emperor against thousands of enemies. He had defended the border for 100,000 years. As for the generals and divine emperors who had gone through life and death with the War Emperor, most of them had been secretly demoted and lost their former glory. Once, if these people joined forces, it would be a great disaster for the divine Martial Emperor dynasty. After the cunning rabbit was killed, the good dog was cooked. Unfortunately, the divine Martial Emperor dynasty did not control the entire Azure continent alone. This was also the reason why the divine Martial Emperor dynasty did not dare to act rashly. In the immortal path, it was easy to fight for the heavens, but difficult to defend the heavens. Haha, Emperor God Martial Emperor, I want to ask young master if I can become your follower if I win this battle? No matter where I come from? Zhan Xiaotian looked at Ling Xiao with a smile. There was no emotion in his eyes, only a shocking battle intent. Of course. Ling Xiao nodded, unperturbed. Whether it was Zhang Xiaotian's temperament or talent, he was one of the best in the world. Young master, this person, Before the Emperor God Martial Emperor could speak, Ling Zhao's expression turned cold. Emperor God Martial Emperor, what is it? This person is not from the imperial dynasty? A mere piece of trash dares to act rashly in front of young master. The crowd roared with laughter. It was obvious that none of the heaven's favorites thought highly of this son of destiny. Emperor God Martial Emperor, I am here to teach him the rules. A young man in golden armor suddenly stood up. He nodded at Wu Tianxing and walked to Zhang Xiaotian. This person's name was Wu Li. He was the second prince's personal guard. Against a piece of trash like Zhang Xiaotian, there was no need for the second prince to do it himself. Chapter 1295. Yes, but don't kill him. Above the Golden Palace, the Lord of the Emperor God Martial Emperor nodded slightly with a meaningful look in his eyes. Especially at this moment, Zhang Xiaotian's lips suddenly curled into a smile, which made him feel slightly uneasy. The firmament appeared, and the divine martial arts were destroyed. This rumor was said by the War Emperor dynasty's high priest himself after observing the Empress of Heaven. If he hadn't planted spies in the War Emperor dynasty, he would still be in the dark. According to the high priest, a celestial star descended from the War Emperor dynasty, carrying the power of the heavens and suppressing all dynasties, and the 100,000 years of rule of the Shenwu dynasty would be completely overturned. However, the high priest did not reveal the origin of the chosen one. No matter how hard the Lord Deity and Martial Emperor tried to find out, they did not find anything. Therefore, in order to intimidate the War Emperor dynasty, the Emperor Shen Wu did not hesitate to instigate a war at the border and killed 5 princes and 3 princesses of the War Emperor dynasty. The war race's valiant martyrs all died in battle, their deaths extremely miserable. Only Zhang Xiaotian was born weak and sickly. Because of his young age, he was protected by the War Emperor in the palace and did not die. Even so, the Emperor God Martial Emperor had no intention of letting the weak little prince go. Instead, they used the excuse of protecting the bloodline of the Battle Emperor to forcefully bring him to the Martial Emperor city. That year, Zhang Xiaotian was still young and ignorant. He only had the sorrow of separation but not the hatred. He remembered the time when he entered the imperial capital with the divine Martial Emperor guards. Outside the imperial war city, on the ancient path, there were countless silhouettes holding golden halberd. They stood there silently, but they scared the divine Martial Emperor guards. Sending off the 9th prince respectfully was like a tsunami that shook the heavens. Unexpectedly, more than 300 years had passed in the blink of an eye. If he had not met Ling Xiao, even if Zhang Xiaotian had managed to escape from the Martial Emperor city, he would have brought endless disasters to the War Emperor dynasty. Fortunately, he now had a chance to leave the city in a dignified manner. With the protection of the Lord Ling Xiao, even if the Lord God Martial Emperor sensed his talent, he wouldn't dare to make a move against the battle tribe. This was what Zhang Xiaotian truly cared about. He dared to kill the Xiao clan's young master and slaughter the people of an entire region for the sake of a god emperor's servant. This kind of responsibility was worthy of respect. Yes, Emperor Lord. Wu Li grinned and bowed. From the beginning to the end, Zhang Xiaotian's face did not have a trace of emotion. With his current cultivation, he didn't even care about the many nobles and young masters in the palace, let alone a prince's personal attendant. The limit of his talent was the firmament, the pinnacle of heaven and earth. How could mere mortals stand in his way? 9th Prince, don't worry. I'll be careful and try to spare your life. Wu Li turned around and looked at Zhang Xiaotian with a sinister smile. However, when he saw the latter's face that had suddenly calmed down, Wu Li's eyes narrowed and his heart skipped a beat. All these years, he was used to seeing Zhang Xiaotian's subservient and servile appearance. She had to admit that it was more like it when she suddenly became serious. Me too. For the first time, Jean Chatillon no longer suppressed the hatred in his heart. Even the sinister smile at the corner of his mouth caused others to unconsciously feel a chill. 300 years of humility and hatred. At first, Jean Chatillon did not understand what a hostage was. He also did not understand why the 30,000 battle attendants who welcomed him into the martial emperor palace had white linen cloth tied around their head. Until one day, when he was bullied by the princes of the divine martial emperor palace and heard their wanton ridicule, Jean Chatillon understood that being a hostage was a lowly status. Then, the missing high priest of the War Emperor dynasty suddenly appeared. It turned out that, when the 8 princes and princesses of the War Emperor dynasty died, the high priest had already sensed that something was wrong, so he used the golden cicada shell escape and hid in the martial emperor city early to wait for Jean Chatillon's arrival. For 300 years, it was the high priest who taught him how to cultivate and conceal his aura. Otherwise, with Jean Chatillon's strength, how could he hide from a group of saints? Jean Chatillon, did you take the wrong medicine today? Woolley furrowed his brows tightly. Suddenly, a golden radiance bloomed around his body. Like a sun, it shone with a blinding divine radiance. Then, he stretched out his palm. Runes shone brightly, and wisps of golden light condensed into a palm print and smashed down. The entire hall trembled with spiritual might. The boundless golden light covered everyone's eyes. However, Ling Xiao did not care about this at all. Based on Jean Chatillon's luck, these extras would be suppressed by him without a doubt. Boom! Following a loud explosion, the boundless golden light suddenly trembled. Then, a figure retreated from it, blood spilling out of his mouth. It was Woolley. His face was already pale, and his eyes were filled with fear as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. Woolley lowered his head and looked at the dent in his golden armor. His lips trembled. He did not expect Jean Chatillon's strength to be so terrifying. His spiritual seal did not hurt him at all. Instead, it was destroyed by Jean Chatillon. How could this be? This trash, how could he hide his cultivation? Inside the palace, many divine martial emperor prodigies' faces turned serious. Even the lord of the divine martial emperor palace had a rare look of seriousness. It was obvious that Jean Chatillon's humility over the years was an act. In other words, this young man's temperament was extremely terrifying. Today, Lord Ling Xiao was choosing a follower. It was a rare opportunity for him. As long as he could leave Martial Emperor City, the name of the War Emperor might be able to shake the world. However, the Lord of the Divine Martial Emperor Palace was slightly confused. Did this matter have anything to do with Ling Xiao? Previously, Wu Hongqiu had said that Ling Xiao and Yao Guang were invited by her from the Daotian Academy. She had even promised him the fortune of the ancestral land. It seemed that Ling Xiao did not know Jean Chatillon beforehand. Otherwise, he could have hidden in the dark and helped him escape. There was no need to offend the divine martial emperor palace. Damn it! If Jean Chatillon was really the heaven's descendant that the high priest had mentioned, there was no way he could leave alive today. Sorry, I haven't fought for a long time. I didn't control my strength well. Jean Chatillon's figure slowly walked out of the golden light. His handsome and cold face was filled with a heart-palpitating battle intent. You! Woolley gritted his teeth as blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. He could feel that his entire sternum was completely shattered. He was almost punched through by Jean Chatillon. And this was under the premise that he was wearing the divine armor. Let me. Just as Woolley was in a dilemma, he saw a young man in a luxurious purple robe walk out from behind the leading marquis. The young man was handsome, with white teeth, red lips, and sparkling hair. He had a noble air about him. It's the grandson of the northern Marquis, Qi Xiun. This is interesting. This young Marquis is one of the 100 talents of this generation. I heard that he fought with the blood-clad Marquis, and won by a narrow margin. Jean Xiaotian will lose this battle. Chapter 1296. Jean Xiaotian, I know you. The purple-robed young man stepped forward and stood in front of Jean Xiaotian. In that pair of long and narrow eyes, there was an unconcealed fighting spirit. I knew it. How could someone with the War Emperor's bloodline be trash? Young Duke Jinbei, I've heard a lot about you. Jean Xiaotian clasped his hands together and bowed slightly. He'd heard of this junior marquis. Even though he hadn't inherited the title of marquis yet, his natural talent and temperament were both at the peak of martial prowess. In fact, there were already rumors that if the second prince could get this young duke to follow him, he might be able to become the emperor. Let me see how much of the War Emperor's power you have inherited. Qi Xiyun nodded and clenched her fist. An ancient cyan blade appeared in her hand. The moment he stepped forward, he turned into a shadow and pounced on Jean Xiaotian. Buzz. Sword radiance danced in the main hall. Boundless sword intent gushed out, shattering the void and destroying thousands of daos. Jean Xiaotian's face turned solemn. He reached out with one hand and an ancient halberd appeared in front of everyone. The halberd was 8 feet long and dark gold in color. Dragon patterns were carved on it, from the clouds out of the abyss, ancient and ancient. At the tip of the halberd, there were countless dried blood stains that dyed the dark gold halberd crimson. It was a ghastly sight. A formless aura suddenly descended. Even Ling Xiao could not help but raise his eyes to take a look, feeling somewhat shocked. This ancient halberd seemed to have a history. War Emperor halberd. I didn't expect the War Emperor to pass this saint weapon to you. Seeing this, the Lord Emperor's eyes narrowed and his face darkened. He seemed to have guessed that Jean Xiaotian's identity was not ordinary. If it was before, he had 100,000 ways to kill him in the martial Emperor city. However, now that he was involved with Lord Ling Xiao, things had become extremely complicated. However, the martial arts competition might be an opportunity for the Lord Emperor God Martial Emperor. As long as Wu Tianxing could kill him in the main hall, no one in the War Emperor dynasty would dare to complain. Boom! The halberd fell and shattered the sword intent instantly. Before Qi Xiyun could react, the halberd light had turned into a dragon's shadow that covered the sky. Boring. Ling Xiao shook his head and closed his eyes to think. Meanwhile, in the Glaze ancient pagoda in the realm Heavenly Palace, the space on the 7th floor was already covered by endless demonic light. The pure darkness seemed to be the source of the world's destruction. It was terrifying. At some point, the demonic light suddenly let out an ear-piercing hum. The space on the 7th floor of the ancient pagoda suddenly. Boundless demonic will fell, like a funnel, enveloped the young man who was sitting in the ancient Glaze ancient pagoda. Of his blood was bloods. Of his. The moment he opened his eyes, the void within a radius of 10,000 miles suddenly collapsed. A demonic figure stood tall in the dark, suppressing everything in its path. The heavenly demon body had finally stepped into the 4th Revolution realm. Sky Demon's 9 transformations. Indeed, each transformation leads to a new realm. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at the dark golden runes on his body. His eyes trembled. He had a feeling that even without using any spiritual power, his body alone was enough to crush any being below the saint realm, be it demons, ghosts, or immortals. It's time to try to enter the saint realm. With a thought, Ling Xiao's figure instantly appeared in the realm. Gu Chaoxiai was still sitting cross-legged in the air, her phoenix robe fluttering in the wind. Her aura had completely entered the saint realm, and it was terrifying. Clearly, it wouldn't be long before she woke up from her cultivation. When that time came, Ling Xiao would have to test hers true thoughts. To enter the 5 transformations, the demonic body's 9 divine blood origins is required. Looking at the destined ones I've met so far, those with ancient divine bloodlines are rare. Ling Zhao's eyes turned cold. Among the cultivators of the human clan, even those with the mandate of heaven, it was extremely rare for them to cultivate bloodlines. From the looks of it, the only one who truly possessed the bloodline of the ancient gods was Xianyuan Weiyang. However, Ling Xiao already possessed the human sovereign's bloodline. As long as he mastered the human sovereign sutra, he would be considered to have a divine bloodline. As for the remaining 8 divine bloodlines, he could only think of a way to find the true great demons and divine beasts in this world. After all, the demon race's bloodline was naturally gifted and was favored by the great Tao. Of course, not all demon race's experts' bloodlines met the requirements. In Ling Zhao's opinion, only the pure-blooded prehistoric demon race's 5 transformations could meet the 5 transformations requirement. Moreover, the person's cultivation must have reached the Supreme Being realm and cultivated the Supreme Being's origin, or be born with divine bloodlines and ancestral awakening physique. All of a sudden, Ling Xiao seemed to have thought of something. With a gentle wave of his hand, an ancient Qingtong token appeared. When he conquered the 4 ancient dynasties, he collected 4 drops of divine blood from the 4 ancient dynasties' seal. Ling Xiao guessed that this drop of blood was left behind by the primordial immortals. He wondered if he could form his own bloodline after assimilating it into his body. However, with Ling Zhao's current strength, it would be difficult for him to withstand the divine blood's power. At the very least, he would have to reach the Supreme Being realm to open a new chapter in his immortal path. Boom! Spiritual light surged in the divine martial hall. Zhang Xiaotian's halberd smashed down, shattering the void in front of him into nothingness and enveloping Qi Xiyun's figure. Xiyun! Duke Zhenbei, who had been sitting in front of the table, paled at the sight. Especially at this moment, the War Emperor's halberd's majestic aura even made him, a Saint Realm cultivator, tremble. The pure gold divine light shot up into the sky and instantly destroyed the layers of sword intent. Everyone saw thousands of divine elephants floating in the air, as if there was a battle shadow behind the halberd that suppressed the world. This power was as heavy as the heavens, vast and surging, causing everyone in the hall to pale and their souls to tremble. Heaven and earth crumbled, and time passed. Qi Xiyun's figure was immediately sent flying. Before he landed on the ground, blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. At this moment, the Duke Zhenbei's face was as pale as a sheet, and his eyes were filled with fear. He could feel that Zhang Xiaotian had not used his full strength at the last moment. Otherwise, with his cultivation of the 8th-level Supreme Being realm, his body would have been easily shattered by the War Emperor's halberd. The War Emperor's direct descendant was terrifying. To the many noble families in the Xunwu dynasty, the War Emperor's name was like thunder to their ears. In fact, there was a rumor that if the War Emperor had not abdicated, the one who ruled the 3,000 celestial dynasties might not have been the Martial Emperor. The War Emperor and the Martial Emperor were all top figures who could crush an era. However, compared to the ambition of the Martial Emperor, the War Emperor's line had always been loyal to their principles. Therefore, the thousands of dynasties and clans were spared from an unprecedented battle. But now, with Zhang Xiaotian's halberd breaking the sky, the War Emperor's name would definitely resound throughout the Azure continent. Chapter 1297. The heavenly light dissipated and silence reigned. A white-robed figure stood in the sky. On the halberd in his hand, dark golden runes swirled around like thousands of dragon runes, containing an aura of supremacy. At this moment, Zhang Xiaotian's body was also covered in blood. However, his aura did not weaken at all. Instead, it became even more ferocious and overbearing. Above his head, the azure sky was faintly discernible, forming a vast and boundless universe. He stood there alone, like an immortal fighting against the heavens. A terrifying aura descended, containing the true power of the heavens. Young Marquis, thank you. Humph. You are indeed the descendant of the War Emperor. Qi Xiun struggled to get up from the ground and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Although there was unwillingness in his eyes, there was no longer a trace of battle intent. With Zhang Xiaotian's strength, he was probably in the top 10 of the Azure Sky 100. There was no way he could win. That's right. Ling Xiao, who had been silent all this time, suddenly put down his teacup and nodded. His dark eyes were deep and dazzling. Are you willing to follow me and be my general? Young master. Hearing this, the lord of the Shenwu martial emperor suddenly shouted before Zhang Xiaotian could respond. Ling Xiao frowned slightly, his expression somewhat gloomy. Beside him, Wu Nianxi's body trembled. She was terrified. Young master, Zhang Xiaotian. I'm afraid he can't be your servant. The lord of the Shenwu martial emperor shook his head and said bitterly. Offending Ling Xiao was a disaster for the entire Shenwu martial emperor dynasty. However, in comparison, if Zhang Xiaotian was the firmament that the grand priest mentioned, there was no way he could walk out of the martial emperor city alive. What a joke! Zhang Xiaotian had endured for 300 years and now, he dared to show off his talent in the Shenwu martial emperor palace. Did he think that Lord Ling Xiao would go against the Shenwu martial emperor dynasty for him? Why? Ling Xiao lowered his head and sipped his tea. He did not care. However, Zhang Xiaotian's eyes flashed with darkness and worry. In the blink of an eye, he felt relieved. If Lord Ling Xiao wanted to harm him, there was no need for him to do so. He could have just told the Emperor God and Martial Emperor about what they had said yesterday. He would probably be a dead man by now. Because Little Tian is the Battle Emperor's only direct descendant. I am protecting him by my side in order to continue the Battle Emperor's bloodline. Therefore, with Martial Emperor Shen's temperament, there was no way he would tell Ling Xiao about Zhang Xiaotian's secret. After all, the fewer people who knew about the fate of the Imperial Empire, the better. So, Your Majesty, do you mean that you want me to take back what I just said in front of all the nobles and heavenly legends of the divine dynasty? Ling Xiao suddenly raised his head and looked at the Lord Divine Martial Emperor. His thin lips curled into a mocking smile. No, young master. To be able to become your follower. Or does the Sovereign Lord think that there is someone in the Azure Sky realm who dares to hurt my followers and servants? Before the Lord Emperor Shen Wu could finish his sentence, Ling Zhao's face turned gloomy. Purple light spread out from his eyes. Endless strange phenomena evolved into chaos. Heaven and earth could not bear his power. Domineering and direct. Even the Lord Divine Martial Emperor had a hint of fear in his eyes. He cursed inwardly. What he said just now was to reveal his sacred name to show his protection and respect for the Battle Emperor's bloodline. He wanted to use it as an excuse to keep Zhang Xiaotian in the Martial Emperor city so that he could find an opportunity to kill him. However, he did not expect the young master to interpret it as a provocation to him. With the foundation of the Ling people, Zhang Xiaotian would not be in any danger if he followed Ling Xiao. Moreover, Ling Xiao was now a sacred name. Who would want to kill him? Demons, ghosts, and demons. Anyone who opposed Ling Xiao was the real evil in the Azure Sky realm. Damn it, it seemed like he had outsmarted himself. Haha, young master, you have misunderstood. What I mean is, the competition is not over yet. Perhaps there will be an unexpected surprise. The Lord Divine Martial Emperor smiled embarrassedly and looked at Wu Tianqing, who was below the main hall. Seeing this, the latter immediately bowed and walked into the hall. Zhang Xiaotian, let's fight. In the past 300 years, Zhang Xiaotian was a piece of trash and a toy in the eyes of Wu Tianqing and the others. Although he had the protection of the Battle Emperor, no one dared to kill him. However, when they were in a bad mood they could still humiliate him. Especially Wu Tianqing. Due to the competition for the position of Crown Prince, he had been depressed all these years. Whenever he was in a bad mood, he liked to have a heart-to-heart talk with Jean Chatillon. Therefore, the Lord Divine Martial Emperor was one of the people Jean Chatillon hated the most in the Martial Emperor city. The second would be the second prince, Wu Tianxing. Jean Chatillon clenched his fists. His eyes were filled with battle intent. It was obvious that the Battle Emperor's descendant had engraved the hatred in his heart. Whoosh! Jean Chatillon suddenly turned around and bowed to Ling Xiao. Young master, if I win today, I will be your servant and follow you to conquer the world. Does that mean the War Emperor dynasty will be protected by the Ling people? I once had a servant from the Xiao clan. He was bullied by the Xiao clan's young master, Xiaomoi. Ling Xiao shook his head and smiled. He looked up at Jean Chatillon. The Ling people are not people who bully others. However, if I can't even protect your people, how can I follow you? If anyone dares to touch the servants of the Ling people, I will kill them without mercy. Boom! Suddenly, a celestial figure appeared in the sky and stood in the 9 heavens. Ling Zhao's body was surrounded by a purple aura. The Taoist rhyme was divine and contained the aura of the great Tao of Avicania. Ancient trees overlapped, divine lightning fell from the sky, immortal phoenixes and sunset clouds flew together, and the mountains and seas merged into the sky. It was too shocking. Everyone looked at the black-robed figure sitting in front of the table with mixed feelings of shock in their eyes. Judging from the talent of this young master of the Ling people would definitely rise after this chaotic world. There was a high chance that they would rule the Azure Sky Empire alone. However, no one knew if the immortals would allow such a thing to happen. Young master is righteous. Jean Chatillon bowed deeply to Ling Xiao. When he got up again, the last trace of hesitation in his eyes had disappeared. Although he had defeated Qi Xiyun, the young duke was also ranked among the Azure Sky 100 heroes. Therefore, although Jean Chatillon was not injured, he had used up a lot of his spiritual energy. Wu Tianxing was the most powerful genius among all the princes of the Shenwu dynasty. Even the crown prince, Wu Tianqi, was much weaker than the second prince in terms of talent and combat strength. If Jean Chatillon wanted to win this battle, he would have to reveal his true trump card. However, with the young master's words, he no longer had any worries. After all, even the Shenwu dynasty would not dare to offend Ling Xiao and the Ling people just because of a rumor. Jean Chatillon, it seems that you are very confident in yourself. Chapter 1298. Wu Tianxing. Today, it's time to settle the grudge of 300 years. Jean Chatillon lowered his head, his entire body trembling. Dragon inscriptions gradually appeared on the War Emperor halberd in his hand, and a terrifying aura surged, shaking the heavens and earth. Ha, Jean Chatillon, who gave you the courage to act so presumptuously in my divine martial emperor palace? Wu Tianxing snorted and clenched his fist, and a dazzling golden saber appeared, shining brightly. Emperor Tao Dragon Qi flowed around him, as if a golden dragon was about to break through the seal of the great Tao and appear in the world. Both the Lord Shenwu Martial Emperor and the Crown Prince Wu Tianqi were surprised when they sensed the aura. The Martial Emperor's inheritance was open to all direct descendants of the Martial clan. The divine Tao Dragon Qi had always been seen as the symbol of the Martial clan's emperor fate. Even with Lord Shenwu's talent, it took him 500 years to condense the Dragon Qi. Who would have thought that the second prince could condense such a terrifying Dragon Qi at only 300 years old? Buzz! Wu Tianxing stepped forward and swung his golden saber, causing the great Tao to hum and the Dragon Qi to surge. A golden dragon divine shadow stood on top of Jean Chatillon's head. Its golden eyes shone with a domineering aura that could suppress everything. Boom! The void rippled, unable to withstand the Saint Qi in the saber, and shattered. Wu Tianxing's figure appeared above Jean Chatillon's head in an instant, and the golden saber in his hand fell like a falling mountain, mighty and unparalleled. Every strand of that brilliant saber radiance contained the power to slay immortals and demons. It was like a blazing sun, floating in the sky and crushing everything. How terrifying! It seems that the second prince's cultivation has improved again. This is the true genius of our divine martial emperor dynasty. The second prince is indeed the most talented emperor bloodline in the past 10,000 years. What a pity! What a pity! Seeing this, the ministers in the palace exclaimed in admiration. Clearly, they were also shocked by Wu Tianqing's saber that contained the dragon chi. Buzz. At this moment, the ancient halberd in Zhang Xiaotian's hand bloomed with thousands of divine runes, which turned into a golden dragon divine shadow and pressed against the saber. Clang! The moment the two collided, a vast amount of dragon chi immediately surged out and evolved into endless Taoist rhymes. It was as if the rules and order had been re-established in the world. Dragon chi! The entire hall suddenly fell into a deathly silence. Everyone looked at the white-robed young man with the dragon halberd in his hand. Their eyes were filled with shock. The War Emperor and the Martial Emperor were both founders of the Shenwu dynasty. Logically speaking, the War Emperor's bloodline should be the only one in the Azure Sky continent and be revered by all races. However, each force could only have one Emperor Lord. Regardless of what agreement the Martial Emperor and the War Emperor had made back then, in the eyes of the world, the War Emperor clan's current situation was not fair. And now, the bloodlines of these two great powerhouses of heaven and earth seemed to be facing the same choice. However, no one knew if the War Emperor clan would continue to lay low or conquer the nine heavens again. Zhang Xiaotian, you've really hidden yourself well. Wu Tianqing's figure retreated, and the numbness that came from his arm made him somewhat fearful. Zhang Xiaotian was still so strong even after fighting against two great prodigies. It seemed that, if he wanted to defeat him today, he would have to use some real means. Just now, his father had sent him a voice transmission. No matter what, he had to kill Zhang Xiaotian in front of everyone. Therefore, even if the War Emperor clan was angry, there was nothing they could do. Buzz. Zhang Xiaotian did not say anything in the face of Wu Tianqing's mockery. Golden light appeared around him, and even the dragon halberd in his hand seemed to be awakened with divine runes, making an ear-piercing buzzing sound. This aura, Wu Tianqing's expression changed, and he felt uneasy. At this moment, he seemed to feel that Zhang Xiaotian's aura had merged with the dragon halberd, and it was indestructible. Deliberately mystifying. However, with Wu Tianqing's talent, it was difficult for him to take anyone of the same generation seriously. So what if Zhang Xiaotian had hidden his cultivation? For the past 300 years, he had no resources and could not cultivate openly. How could he be compared to him? Wu Tianqing's eyes narrowed as he slashed out with his saber. The shocking saber aura pierced through heaven and earth like the rushing Milky Way, and it was extremely domineering. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaotian's expression did not change at all. The moment he stepped forward, the dragon halberd in his hand swept out, and it directly shattered the void above the hall. It was as if billions of stars had shattered at the same time. At this moment, a blue sky covered the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers above his head, and it was surrounded by endless Taoist rhymes. Under the blue sky, Zhang Xiaotian's body was covered in divine light, and he looked like an immortal. Even with Wu Tianqing's strength, he felt his bones tremble when the dragon halberd swept past him. Blood flowed out of his mouth, and the fear in his eyes intensified. I don't believe it. Then, he took a step forward, holding the ancient saber tightly with both hands, and charged out with the power to slash the heavens. The dragon shadow that was originally coiled around his body was now falling with the ancient blade. It was mighty and unstoppable. Imperial dragon dominating saber, dragon piercing the nine heavens. Thousands of draconic luck gathered in the saber. 100-foot-long crack immediately appeared above the hall. Wherever the dragon halberd passed, multicolored light spewed out, annihilating the 9 heavens. Obviously, Wu Tianxing had used all his strength in this slash. Even so, Zhang Xiaotian's expression was still calm. Then, a shocking scene appeared. The sky that had originally enveloped his head had turned into tens of thousands of rays of divine light that descended from the sky and completely enveloped his figure. At this moment, Zhang Xiaotian's aura strangely disappeared. It was as if he had completely merged with the world. He was ethereal and illusory, but his divine power was unparalleled. Buzz, buzz. The sky trembled and the temple collapsed. Wu Tianxing's figure finally appeared in front of the divine shadow in the sky. The ancient saber in his hand slashed horizontally, wanting to destroy everything. Crack! At this moment, a strange, shattering sound suddenly came from the endless divine light. Then, everyone watched in shock as Wu Tianxing's figure directly pierced through the divine light and fell from the sky. However, before he could react from the shock, a shining golden halberd suddenly appeared out of thin air. The halberd cut through the sky and ruthlessly struck his back. Poochie! Unsurprisingly, Wu Tianxing's entire body fell, causing countless cracks to appear on the bluestone of the golden temple. His aura almost instantly withered, and he struggled for a long time, unable to stand up from the ground. Clang! Until Zhang Xiaotian's figure reappeared, holding the golden halberd horizontally and pressing it against the side of Wu Tianxing's head. The entire hall suddenly fell into a dead silence. Everyone looked at the white-robed young man with the halberd in one hand. Their lips trembled slightly, but they could not say a word. Defeated! Wu Tianxing, who was known as the strongest talent in the Shenwu dynasty for 10,000 years, was easily defeated by a piece of trash. The name of the War Emperor today once again shocked the Shenwu dynasty. Chapter 1299. Hiss! The divine martial emperor palace was in an uproar. Whether it was the 18 marquises or the heirs standing behind them, they all had a look of intense fear on their faces. Especially those who had witnessed Zhang Xiaotian's growth over the years. Their eyes were wide open and their mouths were slightly agape. They could not associate this powerful young man with the trash that everyone used to bully. It was hard to imagine how he had cultivated all these years to have the strength to look down on his peers. Or was the bloodline of the War Emperor really that terrifying? Young master, may I be your follower now? Zhang Xiaotian held the halberd in his hand, but he did not look at Wu Tianxing. Instead, he turned to look at the young man who was sipping his tea. Ling Zhao's appearance was the best opportunity he had been waiting for in the past 300 years. Today, as long as this young master nodded, he would be able to break free from his shackles and compete with the geniuses of the Azure continent. The bloodline of the War Emperor had been hiding for 100,000 years, and now it was finally going to reappear. Of course. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently, ignoring the gloomy look on the martial emperor's face. In his opinion, Zhang Xiaotian's talent was not any weaker than Ning Chuan and Chen Qingshan. The firmament saint body, that ethereal and almost indestructible Taoist rhyme, was truly unique. As long as he followed him into the supremacy realm, he would be invincible in the same realm. More importantly, in Wu Nianxi's memory, the bloodline of the War Emperor was the one that dominated the world when the martial emperor conquered the Azure continent. Their combat strength was unparalleled, and they were good at controlling weapons. Although the bloodline was suppressed at the border of the divine martial kingdom, the 30,000 warriors were still able to hold their ground for 100,000 years. Since Zhang Xiaotian had already submitted to him, the so-called 30,000 battle attendants would also become his strength. When the time was right, Ling Xiao only needed to find an excuse to destroy the martial clan and take control of the strongest force in the northwest of the Azure continent. Young master! Seeing Ling Xiao nod, the martial emperor's face finally showed a trace of fear. Today, Jean Chautian had proven his talent by fighting 1 against 3. Even if he was not the heaven that the high priest spoke of, letting him out of the city was equivalent to releasing a tiger back into the mountains. In less than 1,000 years, the War Emperor dynasty would rise and become a real threat to Shenwu. Ling Xiao raised his eyebrows and turned to look at the Divine Martial Emperor. Does the Divine Martial Emperor have anything else to say? Young Master Jean Chautian is a hostage. He is related to the Divine Martial Dragon Fate. Could young Master choose a new follower for my sake? To be honest, the Lord Martial Emperor was also feeling uneasy. Ling Zhao's identity was destined to be a huge rock above his head. The slightest mistake could cause him to be smashed to pieces. However, he was unwilling to let Jean Chautian go so easily. After 300 years of forbearance, Jean Chautian had actually cultivated to such a level right under his nose. Just thinking about this talent and temperament made one's heart palpitate. Does the monarch lord think that what I, Ling Xiao, said was child's play? Ling Zhao's eyes were cold. Suddenly, a sinister look appeared on his face. Or, does the imperial lord think that the Ling people are easy to bully? Young Master, I definitely don't mean that. As long as young Master is willing to change your follower, the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty is willing to pay any price. Any price? Ling Xiao nodded gently with a gentle smile. Seeing the expression on his face, the Lord Martial Emperor heaved a sigh of relief. However, before the smile on his face disappeared, the young master of the Ling people suddenly said, I heard that the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty has a dragon vein that protects the dynasty's fate. How about giving it to the Ling people, Imperial Lord? What? You? The Lord Martial Emperor's eyes narrowed. The dragon's aura around him vibrated. He really did not expect Ling Xiao to be so domineering. He actually wanted to break off all ties with the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty for an unrelated person. Why? You don't want to give it to him? Young Master, other than this condition, any other condition, I don't think it's necessary. Since this person won the competition fair and square, he's Ling Zhao's follower. If the Imperial Lord wants to keep him, then, you'll have to ask the sword in my hand first. Of course, the prerequisite is that the Imperial Lord has the guts to do so. Ling Xiao shook his head. His tone was calm, as if he was talking about an extremely insignificant matter. Hearing this, the entire hall fell into a dead silence. It had been 100,000 years. This was the first time in 100,000 years that someone dared to threaten the Lord Martial Emperor dynasty so openly. Moreover, it was in the imperial palace of the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty. Haha, young master, you must be joking. Since you insist on taking this person as your follower. The Lord Martial Emperor's expression was sinister. However, in the end, he suddenly shook his head and smiled in front of everyone's surprised eyes. Little Tian, since you've become young master's follower, you must be loyal to young master in the future. You can't have second thoughts. It was hard to imagine that the Lord of the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty, a top figure in the Azure Sky Empire, would be intimidated by this black-robed young man. He could not even have a trace of disobedience. Yes. Lord Martial Emperor. Jean Chautian bowed and walked to Ling Zhao's side. He bowed deeply to the latter. Young master. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. There was no change in his expression. Seeing this, the Lord Martial Emperor sighed softly in his heart. His eyes were especially solemn. Since the outcome has been decided, I will open the Divine Martial Ancestral Land in a few days. Everyone can cultivate there. The selection of the 10 people was meaningless to the Lord Martial Emperor now. If Jean Chautian was really the cause of the Divine Martial Emperor's destruction, what he needed to do now was to rope in the 18 marquises as much as possible. Only then would they have the power to resist when the disaster came. As for the Ling people, Even if the martial emperor appeared, he would not dare to provoke them. Otherwise, they would end up like the Foliaceae. Today is Hongcho's wedding. I have prepared a banquet. Everyone can move to the 100 Saints' Palace to attend the banquet. The Lord Martial Emperor waved his hand. He seemed to be tired. However, just as he finished speaking, a slightly mocking female voice suddenly came from outside the main hall. The Divine Martial Emperor court today is really lively. Hearing this, not only was the Lord Martial Emperor stunned, but even Ling Zhao's hand that was holding the teacup suddenly froze in midair. However, unlike the Divine Martial Emperor and the others who were surprised, there was a playful smile at the corner of his mouth. Here it is. From the beginning, Ling Zhao had been waiting for this person to appear. Even if he did not know who this person was or what grudges she had with Wu Hongqiu. However, it was obvious that she would not let the princess of the Divine Martial Emperor go through the trouble of planting the soul curse on the princess of the Divine Martial Emperor. The more attention the people had on them, the more these so-called people of destiny liked to show off. Otherwise, what was the point of showing off when no one was paying attention to them? Who dares to be so presumptuous in my imperial palace? In the past, the Divine Martial Emperor Palace was not a place where anyone could easily enter. However, today was the day of Wu Hongqiu and Xin Jing'an's wedding. Anyone with some status could enter the palace for the banquet. After all, not everyone had the guts to stir up trouble in the Divine Martial Emperor Palace. It was only until a woman dressed in blue with a silver mask slowly walked over from the entrance of the hall that a wisp of astonishment appeared on everyone's faces. This was because the woman who suddenly appeared was not just anyone. She was one of the 100 talents in Qingtsang. She was one of the 12 talents in Tiankei Prefecture. She was Shang Yun with a silver mask. Chapter 1300. It's Xiang Yun from the Heavenly Imperial Palace. One of the 12 Absolutes. Why is she here? Many of the young prodigies in the hall were surprised when they saw who it was. Regarding Xiang Yun's name, everyone naturally had a resounding reputation like thunder. It was not only because she was talented and was one of the 12 Absolutes, but also because she was born with a fragrant body. Even though she had never shown her face to anyone, she was still able to mesmerize all the sky prides in the Azure Sky Empire. It was said that anyone who smelled her fragrance would be enchanted and unable to feel at ease. The Heavenly Imperial Palace? The Lord of the Divine Martial Emperor frowned. They were both supreme forces. Although the Divine Martial Emperor dynasty and the Heavenly Imperial Palace were not enemies, they did not have much of a relationship. What's more, looking at the smile in Shang Yun's eyes, it always made people feel inexplicably gloomy. Xiang Yun from the Heavenly Imperial Palace greets the Emperor. Xiang Yun bowed with a calm expression. There seemed to be a black shadow following behind her. It was illusory and ethereal. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to discover its whereabouts. Who dares to be so sneaky in front of me? The Lord of the Divine Martial Emperor's eyes were gloomy. He was furious that someone dared to act mysterious in front of him. Wu Yu from the Heavenly Imperial Palace greets the Emperor. As soon as the Lord of the Divine Martial Emperor finished speaking, the black shadow behind Xiang Yun suddenly bowed and transformed into a human form. He appeared in front of everyone. It was a young man with a fair face. He was thin and gentle. Especially that pair of long and narrow eyes that overflowed with clear radiance and were extremely deep. Could it be one of the 12 Absolutes, Wu Yu? I didn't expect Ju to appear today. Everyone knew that there were 12 successors in the Heavenly Imperial Palace. Each of them was talented. Wang Yan, the Strength Absolute, had already been crushed by Ling Zhao in the Heavenly Dao City. Although the remaining 10 Absolutes rarely appeared in the world, they were all very famous. Only Wu Yu had never appeared in the world. He was the most mysterious of the 12 Absolute. They did not expect him to appear in the divine martial emperor dynasty with Xiang Yun today. Could it be that the two of them were old friends with Wu Hongzhou and Xin Jing'an? The heavenly imperial palace's two absolutes? Why have you come to my Shenwu dynasty? Emperor Shenwu looked indifferent. If it weren't for their noble status, and the fact that they were backed by the supreme imperial palace, Ingju's actions just now would have been enough for him to give the order to kill them. Of course I'm here to congratulate Princess Hongzhou and the blood-robed Marquis on their wedding. Xiang Yun's voice was gentle, and her eyes that were exposed under the silver mask were filled with charm. There was a faint pink spiritual radiance circulating around his body. It was dense like mist, and it was inexplicably mesmerizing. So you are Hong Chao's friend. Then let's go to the 100 Saints' palace together. The divine martial emperor nodded slightly. Although there was doubt in his eyes, he didn't think too much about it. He did not believe that two people from the current era would dare to cause trouble in his Shenwu dynasty. Wait a minute. However, just as Emperor Shenwu stood up and was about to head to the back of the palace, the silver-masked woman in blue suddenly shouted. She shook her head and smiled. Emperor, there's no need to rush to the banquet. I want to present my gift first. Oh! Haha, Princess Royal, Marquis blood-robed Marquis, Xiang Yun has prepared for a long time for today. Xiang Yun turned around and walked to Wu Hongzhou and Xin Jing'an. From the beginning to the end, neither of them opened their mouths. However, there was a hint of vigilance in their eyes. Xin Jing'an, in particular, frowned. He had an illusion that Xiang Yun seemed to be very familiar. However, he had never been to the heavenly imperial palace, nor had he seen this beauty in any secret territory. Why did she come to congratulate him on his wedding? Moreover, from her tone, it seemed that she had been preparing for today for a long time. Thank you. Wu Hongzhou's pretty face was gloomy. The moment Xiang Yun appeared, she guessed that this person must be related to the blood-soul curse in her body. However, how could a genius from the heavenly imperial palace cultivate such an evil method? Could it be that there was a misunderstanding? Haha, Princess Royal looks pale and has lost her vitality. It seems that she won't live for long. Xiang Yun shook her head and smiled. Her tone was cheerful. Then, she waved her jade-like hand, and a green light suddenly floated out and crashed down. Boom! It was a green stone coffin. I've already prepared a coffin for Princess Royal. This is a high-quality green stone from Mount Sanqing. I personally chose and polished it for Princess Royal. What do you think? Do you like it? Hearing this, the entire hall fell into a dead silence. Everyone looked at the ancient bluestone coffin that stood in the middle of the hall. Their eyes were filled with shock and doubt. On the day of her wedding, she was sending a coffin? Was Xiang Yun provoking Wu Hongzhou, or was she really concerned about Wu Hongzhou's funeral? How dare you! Cough, cough. At this time, looking at the indifferent woman in front of her, Wu Hongzhou's expression turned serious. She could no longer suppress the anger in her heart. Princess Royal, please don't be angry. If you die from anger, then it will be a double blessing. Xiang Yun covered her mouth and chuckled. She did not care about the hatred in everyone's eyes. Who are you? If you continue to insult my wife, I won't be polite. Xin Jing'an frowned and pulled Wu Hongzhou behind him. He coldly looked at Xiang Yun and Wu Hongzhou. They were very familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen them before. Won't be polite? Marquis blood-robed Marquis, please don't be polite. I'm here today because I heard that your silver spear is invincible. So, I want to learn from you. So, you're here to pick a fight? No, no, no. How can you say that? My heavenly imperial mansion and the divine martial emperor dynasty are both supreme. We respect each other. The competition is just to improve our relationship. Besides, I've read about your wife's illness in ancient books. Maybe I can cure it. Xiang Yun smiled playfully and pretended to be mysterious. Why don't we have a bet? What? Is that true? The coldness on Xin Jing An's face instantly froze. Wu Hongqiu's illness had troubled him for a long time. However, the two of them had searched for famous doctors and alchemists, but no one could cure the poison. Now, this beauty from the heavenly imperial mansion had suddenly appeared and knew how to cure it. How could Xin Jing not be excited? Okay, how do you want to bet? I'll accompany you to the end. It's simple. You and my fiancé have a competition. If you win, I'll help you save your wife. But if you lose, you'll destroy your cultivation and disfigure yourself. What do you think? Xiang Yun's indifferent words made the whole hall feel cold. What kind of vicious thoughts did he have to make such a deplorable bet? Or, what kind of deep hatred did Xiang Yun and Xin Jing have that made her play such a trick on the young marquis of the divine martial emperor dynasty? Okay. Xin Jing An's eyes narrowed slightly. He turned to look at Wu Hongqiu and nodded slightly. The 12 absolutes of the heavenly imperial mansion were all outstanding talents of their generation. Some of them even had the combat strength of a quasi-sequence. But he could not avoid this battle. At this moment, Xin Jing had understood that the beauty Xiang Yun had come to provoke him. But why did she hate him so much? Chapter 1301. Buzz. The divine martial emperor palace was filled with a foul wind. A sinister smile appeared on Xin Jing'an's face. It was dazzling and ferocious. Compared to his usual self, Xin Jing'an was like a bloodthirsty demon who wanted to start a massacre. Boom! Beside Xiang Yun, the black-clothed shadow Ju Wu Yu suddenly took a step forward, and his figure strangely disappeared on the spot. Suddenly, the Tao runes in the main hall flickered and spiritual power overflowed. Xin Jing'an held the silver spear in his hand and his red robe fluttered in the wind. He stood there with a domineering aura. Young master, who do you think will win? Xianyuan Weiyang sat beside Ling Xiao. Her eyes were bright and she looked nervous. This heavenly imperial palace is really something. How dare they cause trouble on the wedding day of the eldest princess and the blood-clad marquis? They don't know what's good for them. Hearing this, a smile appeared on Ling Xiao's face, but there was some doubt in his eyes. That's right. He had already guessed the situation. Moreover, this gorgeous Xiang Yun did indeed have luck on her body. However, her luck was different from what Ling Xiao had imagined. 8,000 was not as good as Wu Hongqiu's. Then how did she cast the curse and cut off Wu Hongqiu's bloodline? Could it be that this curse was not cast by Xiang Yun? As for the hatred between her and Xin Jing'an, Ling Xiao could roughly guess it. These two must have had some relationship before. Otherwise, Xiang Yun would not choose to provoke him on the wedding day and bring Wu Yu, one of the 12 absolutes of the heavenly imperial palace. Although Wu Yu did not have any luck, his reputation and combat strength were top-notch in the current generation. It would be difficult for Xin Jing'an to be his opponent. This revenge should be called from disdainful to unworthy. Buzz! Suddenly, a buzzing sound came from the top of the main hall. Endless spiritual runes surged like a tide and moved for thousands of miles. Wu Yu's figure fell from the sky and burst out with dazzling light. In the palm of his hand, there were thousands of Taoist rhymes and laws intertwined. The void and time were destroyed. The great Tao did not exist. Xin Jing'an's expression was grave. On the silver spear in his hand, there were suddenly endless blood patterns lingering around it. A cold light flashed. Blood transformation divine dragon. Boom! Amidst the thousands of miles of blood clouds, a silvery dragon shadow suddenly pierced through the void, destroying the universe, and pierced towards Wu Yu. Cries of surprise could be heard in the hall. Even Zhang Xiaotian had a look of surprise in his eyes. This spear was truly too terrifying. The cold light arrived first, and the spear light was as sharp as a blade. Even if it was him, he probably wouldn't dare to take it head-on. However, at this moment, a smile flashed across Ling Zhao's face. He shook his head slightly and drank the tea in the cup. Since this Wu Yu was known as Shadow Absolute, how could he possibly clash with Xin Jing, unlike this? As expected, just as Shun Jing'an's blood spear was about to touch Wu Yu's figure, he heard a hurried sound of wind breaking from the side. A blurry figure tore through the void, condensing tens of thousands of divine inscriptions, and smashed down ruthlessly. In a hurry, Shun Jing unraised his spear to block in front of him, only to feel a huge force engulf him, instantly shattering the silver spear in his hand. No, Xin Jing'an's expression changed drastically, and blood spurted from his mouth. He raised his arms in a sorry state, trying to block Wu Yu's attack. However, with his strength, how could he be a match for the 12 absolutes of the heavenly imperial mansion? Poochie! Along with a muffled sound, Shun Jing'an's 2 arms were directly shattered. Blood spilled and silence reigned. At this moment, everyone was dumbfounded as they looked at the figure falling from the sky. For a moment, they didn't know what to say. On the day of the wedding, his arms were directly broken by someone, and if Shun Jing'an lost today's bet, he would have to destroy his own cultivation and become a complete cripple. With the divine martial emperor's thoughts, how could he let the eldest princess marry a piece of trash? Jing'an. Wu Hongxi's pretty face was gloomy. She stepped out and blocked in front of Wu Yu. Enough? Haha, eldest princess, are you going to stand up for your husband? In the hall, Xiang Yun suddenly sneered and gave Wu Yu a look. Wu Yu immediately bowed and retreated behind her, extremely obedient. Xiang Yun, the divine martial emperor court and the heavenly imperial mansion have always been harmonious, and there is no enmity between us. Why are you so ruthless today? Wu Hongxi frowned slightly and looked at Xiang Yun in confusion. If eldest princess insists on protecting the blood-clad marquis, Xiang Yun has no other choice today, but Xiang Yun shook her head with a smile, and her eyes were sinister. I can give eldest princess another chance. If you can kill your husband with your own hands, perhaps I can remove the poison curse in your body. What? So, the blood curse in my body was indeed planted by you. Wu Hongxi's eyes turned cold, and a hint of majesty appeared on her pretty face. Behind him, countless figures clad in golden armor stepped forward and surrounded Xiang Yun and Wu Yu. Eldest princess, what do you mean by this? Xiang Yun kindly wants to help you remove the curse. Why are you framing her? However, at this moment, Xiang Yun did not panic at all. Apparently, she was certain that the divine martial emperor court would not dare to kill her and Wu Yu here. The 12 absolutes of the heavenly imperial mansion were the true elites of this generation, and they carried the hopes of the entire mansion. Moreover, the masters of the 12 absolutes were the true elites of the heavenly imperial mansion. Once. Today, the 2 absolutes died in the divine martial emperor palace. The 2 supreme Taoism orthodoxies would most likely fall into a real life and death battle. You! Wu Hongxi gritted her teeth. For a moment, she was a little shaken. However, looking at Xiang Yun's expression, it was obvious that she wanted to humiliate Xin Jing'an. She might not keep her promise. Thinking of this, Wu Hongxi secretly glanced at Ling Xiao, who was at the top of the main hall. Currently, in the entire main hall, only this young master could resolve this conflict. Young master, the blood-clad marquis is so pitiful. Can't you help him? Xianyuan Weiyang pouted and shook Ling Xiao's arm with both hands. A pitiful person must have something to hate. Ling Xiao shook his head slightly and smiled gently. But today is the eldest princess' wedding day. Could it be? Blood-clad marquis, since you've lost, are you going to keep your promise and destroy your cultivation base? Xiang Yun sneered and looked at Xin Jing'an, who had lost both his arms, with hatred. I can destroy my cultivation base and even kill myself here, but the curse on Hongxi's body, blood-clad marquis, Do you think you still have the right to bargain with me now? Xiang Yun shook her head and smiled gently. Her tone was extremely gentle. However, the more she acted like this, the more one felt that she was suppressing an extremely terrifying hatred in her heart. Both of you, aren't you looking down on the Divine Martial Emperor Court? At this moment, the Divine Martial Emperor Court's lord suddenly snorted from the top of the main hall. Endless pressure poured down, and the heavenly might was mighty and intimidating. Chapter 1302. Emperor Lord, before I entered the Divine Martial Emperor Palace, I bid farewell to my master and he told me. As the spiritual pressure descended, Xiang Yun's face immediately turned pale, and even her footsteps were somewhat staggered. Behind her, Wu Yu stretched out his hand and helped her down. His eyes were cold. My master told me, if I die in the Divine Martial Emperor Palace, he will be very sad. How dare you threaten me? Emperor Shenwu grunted coldly. There seemed to be two dragon shadows in his golden eyes, giving off an overbearing aura. Seeing this scene, the corners of Ling Zhao's mouth immediately raised into a smile. Then, he placed the teacup in his hand on the table and raised his head to look at the four figures standing in the hall. Emperor Lord, the two of you. Hearing Ling Zhao's words, the Lord of Divine Martial Emperor's aura turned cold and he nodded. Young Master Ling Zhao? To be honest, he did not want to offend the heavenly imperial palace. The battle between the two supreme orthodoxies was known as an eternal battle in the Azure world. It would last for tens of thousands of years. If the two forces did not attack for a long time, other forces would take advantage of the situation. After all, no matter how strong the Divine Martial Emperor was, it could not withstand tens of thousands of years of turmoil. Moreover, the world was in chaos. Demons, ghosts, and demons were fighting for the power of heaven and earth. If there was any turmoil, it would be a disaster. However, today, Shang Yun and Wu Yu were too bold. Two sky prides dared to challenge the Divine Martial Emperor. They did not know what was good for them. Master Ling Zhao? A wisp of surprise appeared on Xiang Yun and Wu Yu's faces as well when they heard this, and then they turned around to look at the black-clothed young man that sat upright in the hall with fearful gazes. Everyone in the heavenly imperial palace knew about Wang Yan's death. However, this Li Ju died in a fair fight. He was killed by the young master of the Ling people with one punch. He could not blame anyone else. Today, they could ignore the Divine Martial Emperor Palace's prestige, but they would not dare to offend the successor of the Ling people. Otherwise, even their master and the palace master would not dare to say anything. The Divine Martial Emperor of the Ling people was powerful. The two of you came from afar, so it's impossible for you to provoke me for no reason. Ling Zhao's smile was gentle. What he cared about in his heart was naturally not the life and death of Shang Yun. Furthermore, in his eyes, the two of them were already dead. Why wouldn't he take the opportunity to provoke a conflict between two supreme Taoism factions? Only when the Azure Sky realm was truly shaken would he be able to obtain more fortune. However, at this moment, he still had doubts in his heart. Who had planted the blood-soul curse on Wu Hongxi? Also, just what sort of secrets does the destroyed evil sect have? He still needed to find answers to these things from Shang Yun. Naturally, he wouldn't let her die so easily in the hands of the Lord Divine Martial Emperor. Young Lord is wise. Today's matter is a personal grudge between me and Xin Jing'an. I hope young Lord will not interfere. Shang Yun pondered for a moment, then suddenly bowed deeply to Ling Zhao. Hearing this, Ling Zhao's smile widened, but there was a hint of hesitation on his face. I shouldn't interfere in your personal grudge, but I have some friendship with the eldest princess. If you can't give me a satisfactory answer today, I'm afraid it won't be appropriate. Humph. Wu Yu snorted coldly, and spiritual light bloomed around his body. His figure, however, suddenly disappeared from where he stood. Seeing this, Ling Xiao immediately shook his head and smiled. In the next moment, a purple aura suddenly circulated in his eyes. The entire space in the hall strangely came to a standstill. In the area about 10 feet around the cloud, thousands of strange phenomena appeared one after another. Divine mountains, great rivers, a red sun, a sea of stars, and endless great Tao order lingered around. Wu Yu, who had originally disappeared, suddenly fell from midair. His face was pale, and there was clearly a trace of intense fear in his eyes. There was an uproar. Everyone looked at Ingju, who was surrounded by strange phenomena, and their eyes were filled with ridicule. The dignified 12 absolutes of the heavenly imperial palace couldn't withstand the power of Lord Ling Zhao's gaze? How ridiculous! However, in the next moment, everyone felt somewhat relieved. After all, the successor of the Ling people in front of them was a righteous elite who had severely injured the Sky Demon and received praise from the Lord of the Daotian Palace. If he was not strong, the human race would not have a trace of providence to speak of. Young Lord. Shang Yun's eyes trembled as she looked at Wu Yu, who fell in front of her. She hurriedly raised her hand to stop him from struggling. Then, there seemed to be a trace of loneliness and bitterness in her eyes. Suddenly, she raised her hand and pressed on her silver mask. In the next moment, she pulled with all her strength and directly took off the silver mask from her face. The entire hall fell into a dead silence again. Everyone looked at the ugly face in front of them that was full of scars. Their eyes were filled with fear, and they only felt a chill run down their spine. Their Tao heart trembled. Who would have thought? The peerless beauty of the heavenly imperial palace actually had such an ugly and ferocious face. Ridiculous. Disgusting. However, what did this have to do with her appearance in the divine martial emperor palace today? Clang! This face was eaten by the earthly fire ant. There is no way to recover it. Shang Yun released her hand and threw the silver mask away. There was a bitter smile at the corner of her mouth. And all of this was given to me by Xin Jingan. What? Everyone was stunned as they looked at Xin Jing and in shock. Everyone knew that the Marquis of the Blood-Clad Marquis, Xin Jingan, had a violent personality and was brave enough to fight against 10,000 enemies. However, he was only cruel to his enemies. He had always been gentle. How could he be so ruthless to a woman? You are Xin Jingan. Have you ever thought that the weak woman who you broke off your engagement with now has the strength to decide your fate? Shang Yun looked up and slowly raised her hands. Endless spiritual light began to fluctuate around her, forming a turbulent tide. Lu Shang Yun, you are not dead. Ha 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 ha. If I die, how will the world know your true appearance? Shang Yun smiled eerily, her eyes were full of hatred. Xin Jing and I were originally betrothed before we were born. Unfortunately, my Lu family's fortunes declined. When I reached adulthood, I did not meet my ideal husband. Instead, I received a letter of divorce. Originally, my Lu clan was surrounded by strong enemies. However, as the engagement was still there, they had concerns in their hearts. However, Xin Jingan made a big fuss and publicly broke off the engagement when my Lu clan was hosting a banquet, forcing my Lu clan into a desperate situation. That night, my Lu clan's 1,367 living beings were all slaughtered. Only when I was running for my life, I fell into the devil abyss and luckily escaped. Today I have killed all my enemies. However, if Xin Jingan is not dead, my heart will not be at ease. I am ashamed to face the souls of the Lu clan. As soon as she finished speaking, Xiang Yun once again bowed deeply towards Ling Xiao. Lord Ling Xiao, I wonder if you are satisfied with this explanation? Ling Xiao frowned slightly. In the end, he only shook his head with a smile and did not say anything. Hearing Shang Yun's words, the Pantheon martial artists, who were originally filled with righteous indignation, sighed softly and turned to look elsewhere. Chapter 1303. Eldest Princess, if you're willing to do me a favor, I might be able to remove the curse on you. Seeing that Ling Xiao had stopped talking, Xiang Yun turned to look at Wu Hongzhou. What she wanted was not only Xin Jing An's death, but also pain. On the day of his wedding, he was killed by his newlywed wife. This kind of miserable fate was almost comparable to that of the Son of Destiny. Hearing this, Wu Hongzhou shook her head. Miss Xiang Yun, I've heard Jing An mention what happened back then. Although Xiang Yun did not admit that she was the one who had planted the blood curse, Wu Hongzhou had already figured out the whole story. However, the identities of the two people in front of her were too complicated. Even Wu Hongzhou did not dare to kill them in public. Oh! When the Lu clan was massacred, Jing An wiped out 2 other clans to avenge the Lu clan. All these years, he has been harboring hatred in his heart. That's why he became so ruthless and killed at the sight of blood. Wu Hongzhou sighed softly. What she said was true. However, she did not expect that the root of all this chaos was a divorce letter. But at that time, Xin Jing An was focused on cultivation. He did not want to be hindered by worldly desires, so he broke off the marriage. However, the Lu clan did not know that the divorce letter was coming. They wanted to use the Xin clan's power to rebuild their clan, which led to the destruction of their clan. In the end, Xin Jing An was at fault, but the Lu clan was also greedy. If the Lu clan did not invite the guests to attend the wedding, how could they be so defenseless? Haha, eldest princess, it's easy for you to say. Should I thank young Master Xin for his kindness? I don't mean anything else. It's fine if the blood curse on me is removed, but Xin Jing An is my husband now. I won't allow you to hurt him again. Wu Hongzhou's humility was gone, and her face suddenly became serious. Xiang Yun looked at Wu Hongzhou in surprise and nodded slightly. Eldest princess is indeed domineering, but this bet, Xiang Yun, if I want to kill you, you may not be able to walk out of the divine martial emperor palace. Before Xiang Yun's voice fell, Wu Hongxian's eyes suddenly lit up with a wisp of light. Boundless murderous intent swept across the world. Only now did the crowd realize that this sickly and weak-looking eldest princess was a heaven's pride that was even more terrifying than Xin Jingan. Is the eldest princess planning to bully others with her power? So what if I bully you? Wu Hongxi snorted coldly. Her red robe fluttered in the wind, and her fine black hair scattered in the wind. She looked quite domineering. Good. Since the eldest princess is so rude, I think we will have many chances to meet again. Xiang Yun's eyes turned cold. She took a deep look at Wu Hongxian before walking out of the hall. Just now, Ling Xiao had said that he had some friendship with Wu Hongzhou. She didn't dare to not give him face. Moreover, if what Wu Hongzhou said was true, and Xin Jingan really did exterminate 2 clans for the Lu clan, it proved that he still had some conscience. Today, causing a ruckus in the imperial palace, Xin Jingan could already be considered to have lost all standing and reputation. Since Wu Hongzhou was so unyielding, according to what that person said, she only had a year left to live. At that time, the separation of life and death would be a small matter. More importantly, Xiang Yun's goal would be achieved. Red silk, you? Xin Jingan's face was pale, and he looked quite touched. Okay, that's enough. I'll send you to rest. Wu Hongzhou shook her head, looking a little tired. She turned to the Lord Shenwu Emperor, Ling Xiao, and the others and said, Father, please forgive me. I'll take my leave first. Go. The Lord Shenwu Emperor nodded. Ling Xiao stood up and headed to the 100 Saints Hall with the other noble realm geniuses. However, just as everyone walked out of the main hall and headed to the depths of the imperial palace, there was a ripple in the void. On the other side, Wu Hongzhou and Shen Jinggan arrived at the bedchamber. Their faces finally turned completely ferocious. Hongzhou, the curse on your body, Li Sun. Wu Hongzhou shouted coldly. The space in front of her suddenly cracked, and a middle-aged man in black walked out. Then, a supreme being's aura suddenly surged and enveloped the entire main hall. Eldest Princess, I've already sent people to follow the 2 disciples of the Imperial Palace. When they leave the Shenwu Weave, capture Shang Yun and bring her back to me. Wu Hongzhou's voice was indifferent. She was no longer as calm and composed as she was in the main hall. If she resists, kill her. But you have to search her soul and memories. This blood-soul curse had been troubling her for a long time. Although Shang Yun did not admit that she had personally planted the curse, anyone with half a brain could tell that Shang Yun hated Shen Jinggan to the core. Therefore, she had only planted the curse on Wu Hongzhou to let him experience the pain of losing his true love. Due to her identity, the Shenwu Emperor did not dare to capture and kill her openly. However, it did not mean that they could not do it behind her back. Hongzhou, Shen Jinggan stared blankly at Wu Hongzhou, who had suddenly become cold and gloomy. She felt a chill in her heart. Her mouth trembled, but she did not know what to say. In the end, she was the one who was truly innocent. Shang Yun did not hesitate to use such a vicious method to seek revenge. Indeed, she deserved to die. Recuperate well. Wu Hongzhou sighed softly and walked out of the main hall. Lord Ling Zhao's attitude just now had made it clear that he wanted to stay out of this matter. After all, Shang Yun's experience was extremely tragic. It was understandable that she wanted to seek revenge. Moreover, Shen Jinggan had been easily crushed by Wu Yu. Anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Shang Yun was more valuable to the West. Now, it seemed that she could only rely on herself. At the same time, outside the martial Emperor city, Shang Yun and Wu Yu walked side by side and landed on a green mountain. Senior brother Wu, thank you for taking care of me all these years. This time, Shang Yun owes you another favor. Shang Yun raised her hand and took off the ugly mask on her face, revealing a fair and beautiful face. When she fell into the demon abyss, she was indeed bitten by poisonous ant. It left an irreparable scar. However, later on, she met a mysterious powerhouse. Not only did he heal the scar on her face, but he also promised her many fortunes. However, the condition was that she had to become a spy. At that time, Shang Yun was already disheartened and had nothing to live for. Her heart was blinded by hatred. Therefore, she agreed without hesitation. Junior sister Shang Yun, you are treating me as an outsider. If Ling Xiao was not here, I would have crippled Shen Jinggan today. Although Wu Yu's expression was cold, there was a trace of gentleness in his eyes when he looked at Shang Yun. Yes, today you and I have caused a ruckus in the divine martial Emperor Palace. I don't think they will let it go easily. Senior brother, junior sister, don't worry. I have already thought of a countermeasure. Wu Yu waved his hand lightly. A ray of spiritual light bloomed and enveloped the two of them. Within the spiritual light, a figure covered in a black robe appeared. It was a puppet that looked similar to Shang Yun. I have concealed my aura with the shadow art. Ordinary Saint Realm experts will not be able to detect anything strange. Junior sister, hide in the dark. I will bring this puppet to the heavenly imperial palace to lure away those pursuers. When junior sister is far away, I will abandon the puppet and use my cultivation technique to escape. Wu Yu smiled indifferently. It was obvious that he had made all the preparations. However, he was slightly puzzled. Why did junior sister strongly object to bringing a Dao protector on this dangerous trip? Chapter 1304. This is too dangerous. Senior brother Wu Shang Yun covered her red lips with her jade-like hands. Her eyes shone brightly, and she looked like she was in love. Just do as I say. Don't worry, junior sister. With my movement technique, Even someone at the peak of the Saint Realm can't kill me. Wu Yu reached out and rubbed Shang Yun's hair. Take this spiritual talisman. It can temporarily conceal your aura. Senior brother Wu. You're a good man, Shang Yun clenched her teeth. She seemed to have mustered up a lot of courage. Suddenly, she tiptoed and kissed Wu Yu's cheek. Suddenly, the current Ingju of the heavenly imperial mansion trembled inexplicably for a moment. He tore open the spiritual screen in a slightly embarrassed manner and flew toward the distant mountain. Around him, there were wisps of spiritual light shrouding him, covering his aura and hiding his whereabouts. When his aura disappeared, the shyness on Shang Yun's face froze. The coldness in her eyes made people feel inexplicably fearful. In the next moment, a golden spiritual talisman suddenly appeared in her hand. She said in a cold voice, "You can do it now." Thousands of miles away, a figure was hidden in the clouds with a cold expression. Ling Xiao lowered his head and looked at Shang Yun, who was hiding in Gu Linshin's place. The corner of his mouth suddenly raised into a smile. There was indeed a problem. With Shang Yun's luck, it was impossible for her to pose much of a threat to Wu Hongqiu. The blood curse was sinister and almost unbreakable. How could she easily plant it on Wu Hongqiu? At this moment, Ling Xiao could feel that when Wu Yu left, there were two auras following behind him. One of them was even at the level of an earthly sovereign. Obviously, these people should be spies sent by Wu Hongqiu or the Shenwu Emperor. With Wu Hongqiu's temperament, since she had gone through so much trouble to invite him and Yaoguang to martial Emperor City, it was impossible for her to be as indifferent as she had been in the palace. However, Shang Yun and Wu Yu's identities were too special. Naturally, Wu Hongqiu did not dare to openly attack them. However, if they died after leaving martial Emperor City, what did it have to do with the Shenwu Emperor dynasty? Ghost Shadow. Ling Xiao said indifferently. The space behind him suddenly rippled for an instant. A blurry and illusory figure stood there quietly, not saying a word. Now that Gu Chaoxiai was in the Realmverse, there was no need for him to protect her. Thus, Phantom decided to stay by Ling Xiao's side for the time being. Follow them. Don't make any moves for the time being. No matter who survives in the end, kill them all without mercy. Ling Xiao smiled warmly. He lowered his head and looked at Xiang Yun, who had suddenly moved. The playfulness in his eyes grew stronger. Currently, there was indeed not a trace of aura on Xiang Yun's body. However, the luck on her body was too dazzling, and it was impossible to ignore. Yes. Ghost Shadow turned around and once again disappeared into the darkness. Ling Xiao lifted his feet and followed Xiang Yun in the opposite direction of the heavenly imperial prefecture. Clearly, there were other secrets hidden on Xiang Yun's body. He just didn't know if there was a person of destiny behind this secret. A day passed in the blink of an eye. News of what happened in the Divine Martial Emperor Palace had already spread throughout the entire Azure continent. Whether it was the trash of the War Emperor Palace defeating the three Divine Martial Emperor Sky Prides and becoming a sage, or the appearance of Xiang Yun and Wu Yu of the Heavenly Imperial Prefecture to seek revenge. All of these shook the Divine Martial Emperor Palace to the core. Especially Zhan Xiaotian, who had the bloodline of the War Emperor, had a great reputation in the 3,000 ancient dynasties ruled by the Divine Martial Emperor Palace. Originally, a trash of a Divine Martial Emperor Palace would not attract too much attention. However, this trash of a Divine Martial Emperor Palace had actually endured for 300 years and secretly cultivated to the top in front of all the Divine Martial sages. It was truly admirable. In the Moonset Palace, Ling Zhao's Dao body sat in front of the table, looking at the white-robed young man standing respectfully before him. Although Zhan Xiaotian had shown sufficient respect to Ling Xiao, he had not yet been recognized by the system to be subdued. Thus, he was not completely subdued yet. Zhan Xiaotian, how did you cultivate to such a level? Ling Xiao looked at Zhan Xiaotian meaningfully. For someone like him, it was only natural that he was extremely talented. However, there must be someone helping him secretly. It was very likely that someone from the War Emperor Palace was hiding in the city to protect him. Young master. Zhang Xiaotian hesitated. Although he had decided to follow Ling Xiao, the Grand Priest was in the Martial Emperor city. Once his identity was exposed, he would not be able to escape from the Divine Martial Emperor Palace even if he was a supreme. I have a question, young master, please answer me. Go ahead. Ling Xiao nodded indifferently. He had already guessed what Zhang Xiaotian wanted to ask. Since he was in a foreign land, he would definitely miss his family. When the Divine Martial Emperor captured him and brought him to the Martial Emperor city, he had the same idea. He wanted to use Zhang Xiaotian as a hostage to threaten the War Emperor Palace. Young master, you said in the main hall that you would protect the War Emperor Palace. Is that true? Zhang Xiaotian suddenly raised his head and stared into Ling Zhao's eyes with a solemn expression. At this moment, there seemed to be a sky above his body. Every word and action of the firmament saint body contained the power of the heavenly Tao. Indeed, he was domineering. Since they are my followers, they naturally bear my honor. Touching them is no different from touching me. Ling Zhao's tone was calm and there were no ripples in his eyes. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaotian took a deep breath and bowed to Ling Xiao respectfully. Thank you, young master. Beat. Destiny's Child has submitted. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 20,000 luck points and 20,000 villain points. Beep. Destiny's Child has submitted. Congratulations to the host for obtaining an additional reward, Divine Tao Dragon Sovereign Sword, Supreme Grade Sacred Weapon. Stay in the Moonset Palace for a few days. When I come out from the Divine Martial Ancestral Land, I will send you back to the War Emperor Palace. Ling Xiao stood up and walked out of the Moonset Palace. Wu Hongqiu had sent someone to invite Ling Xiao to the Divine Martial Emperor Palace to train in the Ancestral Land. As a hostage of the ancient dynasty, Zhang Xiaotian was not qualified to enter the Ancestral Land even after defeating Qi Xiun and Wu Tianxing. This showed that the Divine Martial Emperor Palace's lord was wary of him. Return to the War Emperor Palace? Young master. Zhang Xiaotian's expression froze as a wisp of heartfelt reverence suddenly surged in his eyes. Originally, he thought that since Ling Xiao had taken him in as a servant, he would definitely ask him to follow by his side and risk his life. Who would have thought that he would be allowed to return to the War Emperor Palace? Of course, Ling Zhao's action was not out of kindness. It was because the 30,000 battle warriors were of great use to him. With Zhang Xiaotian's status, once he returned to the War Emperor Palace, he would definitely receive all the resources of the War Emperor Palace. Using the power of the War Emperor Palace to help him grow and control the battle warriors was the best way for this Destiny's Child. Amitba. Young master, are you really not going to interfere with the eldest princess's matter? On the mountain path, Ling Xiao, Yaoguang and Xianyuan Weiyang walked side by side. At this moment, Yaoguang's expression was also somewhat awkward. Judging from the blood curse on Wu Hongqiu's body, even with the Buddhist spiritual treasure she had given her, her life force would be completely exhausted in another year. At that time, she would truly die. Since you believe in karma, why bother asking? Chapter 1305. At the border of the Shenwu Weave. There were many mountains here, and ancient trees formed a forest. There were very few people here. Above the void, Wu Yu looked gloomily at the black-clothed figures in front of him. Their faces were covered in ghost masks, and the corners of his mouth were full of coldness. As expected, just as he and junior sister Shang Yun had guessed, although the Shenwu dynasty pretended to be magnanimous and let the two of them leave, they had secretly arranged for people to kill them on the way. But why did these figures in front of him have an eerie and ethereal aura? In fact, Originally, Wu Yu thought that these people must have appeared to capture junior sister Shangyun, so that they could learn the method to remove the blood curse. However, before Wu Yu could react, countless long chains that were as black as fog suddenly appeared in their hands. They trapped the world and killed all living things. Damn it! Wu Yu's expression changed. Spiritual light bloomed around him, and his entire body turned into an afterimage as he tried to escape. However, although he was a prodigy of the generation and had a unique movement technique, he was as weak as an ant in front of 5 Saint Stage powerhouses. The long chains were surrounded by ghost fog that contained an extremely evil intent. Then, they connected with each other and turned into a 100-foot array that sealed the entire world. Within the array, a cold wind whistled and ghost fog rose everywhere. One could vaguely see countless souls and ghosts shuttling through it and rushing toward Wu Yu. The Ghost Clan's method? At this moment, Wu Yu only felt his body and mind trembling. He did not dare to hesitate at all, and a talisman suddenly lit up in his hand. Rumble! Divine light exploded, and the entire world seemed to be torn apart by an invisible force. The void within a few hundred miles was directly shattered by this force. Thunderclouds fell, and it was as if doomsday had arrived. In front of Wu Yu, a tall illusory figure appeared out of thin air. He looked at the saints in front of him and pushed out a palm. In an instant, boundless immortal radiance surged out and dispersed the layers of ghastly mist. Within the divine light, there seemed to be tens of thousands of divine runes. It was dazzling and intimidating. Boom! Suddenly, a 100-meter-long crack appeared in the originally sealed space. Wu Yu gritted his teeth and took a step forward. His figure completely disappeared in midair. This divine aura spiritual shadow was a life-saving item given to him by his master. It contained a wisp of supreme divine aura. Wu Yu didn't have the slightest chance to escape when facing 5 Saint Realm experts of unknown origins. He directly utilized this trump card at the first possible moment. Hua hua! The terrifying cracks in the void spread for thousands of miles, suppressing all directions. The 5 saints' souls were directly shattered by the river of spiritual light. Wu Yu's master was the true supreme expert of the heavenly imperial palace. Even if it was just a wisp of divine might, it was not something an ordinary supreme expert could contend against. A wisp of coldness appeared on Wu Yu's face when he saw this scene. The reason he dared to distract Shenwu's attention by himself was because he had such a trump card in his hand. Now it seemed that the Grand Princess of the Divine Martial Kingdom had underestimated him. She had only sent 5 saints to capture him and Shangyun. It was ridiculous. However, just as Wu Yu's face was filled with disdain and he lifted his foot to walk into the distance, he saw the void above his head shining with golden light again. Then, a pure golden pagoda came crashing down from the sky, enveloping the heavens and making people feel small and insignificant. Even if Wu Yu was confident that his cultivation method was difficult for a Saint Realm expert to contend against. However, under the cover of this golden light, he couldn't summon the slightest desire to escape. Are you going to come with me obediently, or do you want me to cripple you first before taking you away? Deep in the void, a black-robed figure stood with his hands behind his back, looking indifferent. Hearing this, Wu Yu's eyes narrowed and his face was filled with confusion. Who was this? Or could it be that the 5 Saint Stage experts who appeared earlier were not sent by the eldest princess? This person in front of him was... Who are you? A dead man doesn't need to know too much. Li Sun shook his head. The moment he took a step forward, the void shook. The area covered by the golden pagoda shrunk at an extremely terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, it only covered the top of Wu Yu's head, binding him to the spot and making it difficult for him to move. In front of a sovereign realm expert, even with Wu Yu's means, he could only be trampled on like an ant. Li Sun stretched out his hand and formed a spiritual seal out of thin air, capturing the black-robed puppet beside Wu Yu. But The moment the puppet was in his hand, Li Sun's face suddenly froze, and a look of horror flashed across his eyes. He hurriedly made a move and shattered the puppet's black robe, revealing a figure shining with a metallic luster. You! Li Sun clenched his fist and crushed the puppet. He glared at Wu Yu fiercely. Speak! Where did you go? Where did the woman who came with you go? Ha 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 ha, why are you afraid? If I die here today, you, the Grand Princess, and even the Lord God Martial Emperor will be buried with me. Wu Yu sneered, but he felt the golden light around him suddenly tighten, and his bones, blood, and organs were about to shatter under this huge force. Poochie! In a breath's time, Wu Yu's aura withered. It's okay, you will tell me. Li Sun's eyes were gloomy. He waved his hand and captured Wu Yu. He turned around and was about to leave. But, just then, there was another change. The sun that was hanging in the sky suddenly emitted a faint ray of black light. Then, the world in front of Li Sun and Wu Yu's eyes fell into darkness. There was dead silence, and there was no sound. It was as if everything was frozen at this moment. All living things had died, and the era had come to a standstill. At the end of the darkness, a figure slowly floated up into appearance, and it silently appeared behind Li Sun like a ghost. It was not until the dagger with a black light was pressed against his neck that the earthly sovereign expert felt a chill rising from the soles of his feet and spurting out. Qi, accompanied by a soft shattering sound, Li Sun's head fell from midair. The shock on Wu Yu's face eventually turned into a wisp of intense terror. Senior, thank you for saving my life. At this time, although the current Ingju had some doubts, the black figure's means were similar to his master's. Both of them had superb body movements and could kill without leaving a trace. Could it be Martial Uncle or Martial Uncle? But, before Wu Yu could react, the black dagger slashed out again. There was no hesitation at all, and his head was neatly cut off. This, at the last moment of his life, Wu Yu was completely lost. Why did the experts from the three forces want to kill him? Other than the Xinwu dynasty, who were the other two forces? Unknowingly, Wu Yu felt as if he had fallen into a very deep trap. However, who had set this trap? Or rather, how many layers of the trap there were? He did not see clearly until his death. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.